A man who never removed his hat. Why? A secret or a disguise? Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Your voices bring this mystery to life. Let's begin. It started, as these things often do, with a ring at the brownstone's door that I didn't feel like answering. It was 2 minutes past 11, which is not the prime hour for uninvited guests, especially when the orchid room upstairs is sacred territory and Wolfe is in conference with his 3,000 botanical mistresses. But since I'm the one with legs that move around here, I swung open the door and came face to face with a man who looked like he'd been carved out of grey stone and then polished for effect. The odd part wasn't the grey suit or the thin briefcase he carried, or the stare that could peel paint. The odd part was the hat, a dark felt number, pushed low over his brow, shadowing eyes that didn't want to be seen. Nothing unusual about wearing a hat in New York, sure, but he didn't tip it, adjust it, or even twitch toward removing it as he stepped inside when I invited him. And that, brother, was unusual. Wolfe has opinions about hats indoors, very firm opinions. I let him into the front room, noting the hat's firm residency, and asked the polite question, "Name?" He answered, "Call me Tynan," in a voice that had more gravel than a Jersey lot. "Fine. Call you Tynan. But what does your mother call you? And more to the point, what should I call Mr. Wolfe to get him to come down?" "I'll wait." He lowered himself onto the red leather chair like a block being set in place, hat still firmly planted. This was heading for a collision course. Wolfe has tolerated many trespasses over the years, clients weeping, cops barging, murderers posturing, but a man keeping his hat on in Wolfe's office. That was a declaration of war. At 11:45 sharp, the thump of Wolfe's tread on the stairs announced the end of his orchid tryst. I let him waddle into the office unprepared, which might count as cruel and unusual, but I was curious how he'd handle it. Wolfe took his throne behind the desk, let his eyes drift up from the chair's guest to the brim of that hat, and settled there like a gun locking on a target. "Goodwin," he said without removing his gaze. "What is this?" "A man named Tynan says he'll wait." "Wait for what?" Tynan answered before I could. "For you to hear me, for you to understand the terms before I speak them." Wolfe let out a noise that was half growl, half sigh. "Remove your hat." "No," Tynan said simply. And just like that, the sanctity of the brownstone cracked. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits, and I knew we were in for it. I don't claim to be a theologian, but I've watched enough profanation to recognize a sacrilege when I see one. The man kept his hat on and looked at Wolfe as if the brim were a badge. Wolfe looked back like a man, considering whether to swat a fly or build a theory about it. His lips compressed, which is as close as he comes to rolling up his sleeves. "You are in my house," he said, "and your head need not be shielded from rain or angels. Remove it." Tynan didn't. He set the briefcase upright between his shoes, the way you might park a coffin on end, and said, "I said there were terms. The hat stays. If you cannot accept that, we are finished, and I apologize for wasting your time." I knew then why he hadn't called first. You don't give Nero Wolfe a chance to say no in advance if your plan includes stepping on his creed. I waited for Wolfe to explode. He didn't explode. No, he inhaled, a deep, whole-body operation that made the chair creak, and let it out again in a long, measured stream that cooled the room 10 degrees. "Your presumption is nauseating," he said, "but I have endured worse for the hope of not being bored. Proceed with brevity." That was my cue to sit, because when Wolfe trades doctrine for curiosity, he's either about to charge a fee or deliver a sermon. Tynan took neither bait. He kept his hands on the briefcase handle and said, "Confidential client. A problem of theft and leverage. The thing stolen is not an object. It is a position, an advantage. Someone within a small group has been using information to bleed the client of money and reputation, bit by bit, while remaining above suspicion. There will be a meeting tonight to decide a course. The client wants that meeting held here. If you've ever seen a Glock freeze in January, you know how fast the temperature can go to the wrong side. I stared at him. Here? Here, he repeated, because your house is considered neutral ground by people who don't agree on anything else. Also because your presence changes the behavior of liars. Flattery ill becomes you, Wolfe said. My house is not a hall, and I'm not a referee. Why here? For the same reason I'm wearing the hat, Tynan said. Because someone is watching for movements, facial tells, and signals, and I can't give them any. I told him I had never met a man whose forehead could betray a conspiracy, but I appreciated the innovation. Who's watching? One of the four, he said. Possibly two. He opened at the briefcase just wide enough for paper to show and closed it again. Names, backgrounds, the last 6 months of transactions, everything you will want to see, but only if you agree to host and to certain conditions. Conditions, Wolfe said, fastening the word to a hook. No police. No recordings. You and Mr. Goodwin may ask questions and control the room, but you do not disclose your findings without the client's permission, unless the matter rises to a crime in progress that compels you as a citizen, and the guest list cannot be altered. Pooey, Wolfe said, you come to my house to dictate how I use my senses and to instruct me in citizenship. And you keep your hat on. You will soon request that I breathe less. You can breathe as you like, Tynan said, but I was told you value the integrity of your stage. That landed. Wolfe does not call this room a stage, but he knows it is one, and hearing the word from a stranger tested him. I saw his eyes tick to the globe, to the beer glass, to the yellow chair where he likes to place the person he intends to fence later, and back to the brim that had become a character in the room. What is the stake? He asked, and when Wolfe asks that way, it is a matter of appetite. Money? Enough to ruin a man and stain 3 others, Tynan said. But the deeper stake is the structure they built together. If this goes wrong tonight, it collapses, and people outside the room get hurt who never deserved to be in the story. Whose story? Wolfe said. And what is the structure? A foundation, Tynan answered. They fund work that does not get headlines. Treatment programs, civic kitchen projects, legal aid in neighborhoods where the buses don't stop, scholarships for people who don't know a person to list as a reference. It's not glamorous and it's not clean, and that's why the opening is there for someone with clean hands to pull dirty strings. My client believes the thief will force a decision tonight that gives him a chokehold for good. If you want Wolfe to consider a case, try telling him you're defending either the English language or the dinner table. He will consider charity if there is a sane angle. He scowled, as if he had been offered a platter of carrots disguised as meat. This is sentimental bait, he said. Sentiment is blinding and cheaply procured. Tynan didn't blink. Not sentimental, practical. If the thing collapses, the damage will land where you care about. On cooks making food people can afford to eat. On places where hungry men get kitchen jobs instead of advice. You have a cook. You eat. You understand the difference between food that fills a gap and food that makes a life possible. Fritz, who had been as silent as a snowfall in the doorway, stiffened and then melted away. I didn't miss it, and neither did Wolfe. The air stretched. Wolfe drummed his fingers once on the desk. It is the equivalent of another man pacing 4 blocks. And then he said, "You will tell me the names. If you agree to host." "Confound it," Wolfe said. "You will tell me the names and you will remove your hat, and then I will tell you whether I will permit you to trespass further." Tynan's answer was ready. "I can tilt it up so you see my face. That's the best I can offer. There are reasons." He raised the brim with 2 fingers. The face underneath was younger than the voice, mid-30s with a scar that ran back into the hairline from the temple, fresh pink under a field dressing that had been hidden by felt. The scar wasn't the reason for the hat. The dressing was. Satisfied? No, Wolfe said. Acquainted. He glanced at me. Goodwin. Yes, sir. If we grant this absurdity, there will be conditions of our own. You will give me 15 minutes with your papers now. You will provide me with a telephone number that reaches your client or your client's steward at any hour. You will accept that if in my judgment a felony is being advanced or accomplished under my roof, I will stop it without consulting you. You will accept also that if I am displeased at any irrelevant moment, I will end your meeting by standing up. Understood, Tynan said. And the time? 8 o'clock, Wolfe said as if he were assigning the moon. If I agree at all, Goodwin, bring beer. I went to the small fridge and did the honors, while Tynan drew out the packet and held it like a priest with a relic until Wolfe made his fingers into a drawer and took it. I caught a breath of something when the briefcase opened. Camphor, maybe, or the clean hospital tang of whatever was under that hat. He didn't flinch while Wolfe slit the clasp and spread the contents like a deck across the blotter. He skimmed. Wolfe can read in a way that isn't reading. His eyes ride the lines, and then his hand floats to mark a point without looking. He paused 3 times and grunted twice, once contempt and once interest. This is slovenly bookkeeping, he said at last, which I suppose is the point. The money flows in circles and stops where it is supposed to stop until it doesn't. Who prepared these summaries? I did, Tynan said, from the originals. Humph. Wolfe flicked to the back page, where names like to hide. There are 4. Yes. The chairwoman, Wolfe read, Miriam Caro. The treasurer, Prescott Lyle. The operations director, Lawson Reed, and their public liaison, Saffron Vale. A name like a flower, pretending not to be one. And you? I don't exist, Tynan said. I facilitate without being seen. That is an idiocy, Wolfe said, but a common one. Why is this meeting at all? Why do you not simply notify the police? Because the acts so far are legal, Tynan said, and the next one won't be, but only if we choose it. The thief is maneuvering them to a vote on a contract that looks clean but will be blood when it's signed. It will shift control of the Foundation's intake to a new sponsorship initiative run off books, and the key will be that it requires immediate implementation with discretionary authority. Once that motion passes, the person who wrote it holds the leash. The pattern in the past 6 months points to one of the 4. The client wants to stop it without destroying the Foundation live on stage. So you want theater, I said. In a theater. I want the confidence of this room, Tynan said, and I want Mr. Wolfe's way of putting a sentence in a place where it cannot be ignored. Wolfe's eyes half closed, which is him tasting a flavor. You will have coffee, he said to me, and you will telephone Miss Caro, Mr. Lyle, Mr. Reed, and Miss Vale in turn. You will not reveal the subject, you will not wheedle, and you will not listen to their versions. You will inform them that Mr. Wolfe requires their presence at 8 o'clock for a matter bearing on their association, that refreshments will be provided, and that they should expect to be insulted if they arrive late. If any refuse, inform me before you try persuasion. Yes, sir, I said. And the hat? The hat, Wolfe said, is a pustule on the day, but I will lance it later. For now, he will tuck himself out of sight. Goodwin, show Mr. Tynan the front room. Fritz will bring him something restorative that does not offend his head. I'm not a patient, Tynan said. You're everyone's patient until you are not, Wolfe replied. Go. I guided Tynan out, and when I turned to close the office door, I caught Wolfe leaning in with the papers like a man warming his hands. In the front room, I told Tynan he could sit under the portrait and keep his brim, but if he scratched his bandage, I would slap his wrist. He looked at me as if it had been a joke he wasn't sure how to take, and then sat anyway. Fritz brought a cup that smelled like ginger and a hint of honey, and placed it in a way that didn't require the man to incline his head. That's an art. I went back to the office to start the calls and got the look from Wolfe that means he wants silence unless a building is on fire. It took me 12 minutes to get all 4 on the line, which is either luck or the kind of coincidence you file for later. Caro was brisk and cool, spoke like a metronome, and accepted in 5 words after hearing Wolfe's name. Lyle asked one question: "Will there be minutes?" And when I said no, he said yes. Reed was out of breath and pretended not to be. He wanted to propose 9 o'clock, and I told him 8 or never, and he picked 8 like a man choosing the smaller gallows. Saffron Vale sighed in a way that suggested she had been waiting to be summoned by someone in a better suit than the last man who tried it. She said she wouldn't miss it, darling, and hung up before I could tell her I wasn't darling. When I reported success, Wolfe nodded without looking up. "We will need chairs," he said, which meant I would lug them in later, and "we will need stout envelopes," which meant Fritz would oblige. He set the packet aside and steepled his fingers. "Something here is dissonant," he said. "The sums are small enough to disguise as friction, yet the pressure for immediacy is absurd. Someone thinks speed will grant legitimacy. That is either panic or a schedule not of their making. We will inquire which. And the man with the hat, he is either telling the truth about being watched, or he believes a lie told to him effectively," Wolfe said. "In either case, he is useful. His offense against decency will be useful too. It will give me a handle." He closed his eyes for a moment, releasing me like a teacher who has finally decided, "You may go write the words on the board." "Go," he said. "Call Saul?" I asked. He hesitated. The line of his mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like an equation arriving at itself. "Not yet. If someone watches our visitor, they will note Saul's shadow and mistrust the scene. We will be alone and hospitable. Meanwhile, you will go upstairs and look in the kitchen. I want to know whether anything there has been touched that ought not to be touched. Because of the hat. Because of Tynan," he said. "Men who arrive with conditions produce conditions." I went. Fritz met me at the kitchen door, his eyebrows as eloquent as testimony. Nothing was out of place, which in that room means nothing in the universe had dared move. Still, I did the usual, glanced at the spice rack, the drawer of knives, the cooling trays, the little ledger where Fritz notes purchases only he understands. Everything smelled like order and butter. My nose caught a faint trace of that same camphor from the front room, riding the air like a memory. When I came back down, Wolfe was still with his papers, and the hat was still in the next room, and the brownstone was still ours, but the edges had been pressed. At a few minutes before 1, Wolfe shut the packet, put it aside as if he were letting a witness cool off, and said, "We will permit it." At 8, I told Tynan, and his shoulders eased the barest degree. "There will be consequences," Wolfe added, "if anyone insults my house." "Including me?" "Especially you," Wolfe said. "Goodwin will show you out. You will return at 7:45. If you are followed, you will not bring your tale to my door. If you are hurt, remove your hat and go to a hospital. If you do neither, you are an ass, and I will waste no more beer on you." Tynan stood. He didn't thank us, which was fine. Gratitude would have looked out of place under the brim. He paused with his hand on the doorknob and said, "You will see it tonight. When you speak, they will reveal themselves." "They always do," Wolfe said, "first to themselves, then to me." When the door shut and the silence came back, it had a new tone. It wasn't the quiet of orchids keeping secrets, but the quiet of a room that knows it will be violated and has decided to pretend otherwise. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and spoke as if to air. "We will dine early," he said. "Roast squab, perhaps. I prefer not to meet duplicity on an empty stomach." I said we should serve the duplicity something too, and he said we would. Chairs exactly where I put them, and the knowledge that there are places where hats are not a right, but a privilege that can be withdrawn at will. Then he opened, his eyes again, and the day moved toward 8 o'clock like a clock that had been told to mind its manners. If you've never watched Nero Wolfe consent to host a meeting, you might think it's like renting chairs. It isn't. It's like promising a thunderhead that you will set the table where the lightning asks to sit. By 2 o'clock, the brownstone had adjusted its breathing. Fritz took it out on a set of squab that had never done him harm, and Wolfe took it out on the envelopes I fetched from the cabinet. He wrote the names with the point of a fountain pen that has reduced men to better versions of themselves, and then he paused with the nib above one as if the ink might tell him something. He put it down and told me to go earn my keep. I didn't take the packet. He'd memorized enough for both of us. But I took a scrap of paper with 4 names and the word foundation underlined twice. I didn't head for any of them. He hadn't told me to talk to suspects, and besides, you don't knock on a man's door at 3 and invite him to an 8 o'clock in the same breath while collecting his alibis for dessert. You go around the edges and see whose lawn is trampled. Lon Cohen owes me enough lunches to open a franchise, so I decided to begin at his office. The Gazette's newsroom has the perfume of paper, coffee, and ambition. Lon has all 3 in stock. He saw me and made a sign that meant he was very busy and would be free the second he found out whether I was carrying cash. I leaned on his desk just enough to annoy him and said, I want the polite kind of dirt. 4 names: Miriam Caro, Prescott Lyle, Lawson Reed, Saffron Vale. A foundation that likes kitchens and legal aid. What do you know without calling a lawyer first? He shoved a stack of wires aside and went still in that way he has, like a casino dealer counting chips with his eyes. Caro is old pillar money with new habits, he said. She's clean unless you count believing in committees as a vice. Lyle is a cipher with perfect hair and better cufflinks. Numbers man, likes to be seen being prudent. Reed's a grinder, came up from logistics, knows how to make 15 cents buy 20 cents of beans if you let him ruin the labels. Saffron Vale is a brand with legs. PR sorceress, terrible at hiding boredom, dates money, photographs, well, gets things done when the cameras are off. Why? Because someone in their happy family is about to sell the living room rug and rent the floor back to them by the hour. What about the foundation? Lon snorted. Depends which part you mean. The public story is a machine that turns gala checks into soups and briefs. The private story is they've been pushing to grow into corporate tie-ins. There's a whisper about a sponsorship slate this quarter, naming rights for things you don't want named. The usual battle. Virtue says no, budgets say yes. The donors like their name on the chandelier. The people on the floor don't want it on the ladle. Who's pushing? If it's a question, it isn't Caro, Lon said. She hates compromise that looks like compromise. Lyle could be convinced by a spreadsheet with little green arrows. Reed would hate the admin overhead unless he's the one holding the tap, and Saffron probably pitched it and then pretended not to when the wrong person objected. What's the real question? The real question is who tries to rush a vote at 8 that hasn't been cooked in a pot yet. Lon glanced at the wall clock. You picking a side, Archie? I'm setting the table. He reached for a file drawer and yanked paper like a magician pulling scarves. You didn't get this here. 2 months ago they rolled out a pilot at a kitchen in the East 70s. Community visibility activations. My editor threw up in his mouth on the phrase and asked for an aspirin. The kitchen lady raised hell about a banner that blocked her pantry door and a crate of branded aprons that came with an invoice marked Donor Care. Who shepherded the pilot? He tapped a highlighted name with the flourish of a man closing a case. Reed. Who sold it? Vale. Who didn't sign the check? Lyle, until someone recoded it as outreach and ran it through a discretionary fund under public events. Who recoded? If I knew that I'd be in your chair, he said. The ledger note says, per ops. See Appendix B. There is no Appendix B. I thanked him, told him he could buy me a sandwich to salve his conscience, and left him complaining about deadlines to a phone. The East 70s isn't where you go for mystic enlightenment at 3 in the afternoon, but a kitchen is a kitchen, and I like to look where money becomes soup. The place was clean, thinner than it should have been, with a line of people doing what lines do: wait and pretend the wait isn't the point. The manager was a thick-boned woman with arms that could fold a man into agreement. A sign on the wall read, "We see you." Another sign leaned against a crate, rolled up and sulking, with the corner of a logo showing like a bruise. "Afternoon," I said. "Archie Goodwin. I like your operation and I like knowing things. Mind if I ask a terrible, shallow question about marketing?" She cut her eyes at me and, finding no halo, decided I might be entertainment. "If you're selling something, sell it to the sink," she said. "It needs a new gasket." "I'm buying," I said, and produced a smile that has closed witnesses and opened doors. "I want to know who asked you to wear the aprons with the sponsor's name." "That would be Miss Vale, with Mr. Reed nodding like it wasn't his idea, and he hoped it would go away," she said, the words flat and practiced. "I told them our people don't like being turned into scenery." Miss Vale told me that storytelling is how donations happen. I told her that stories we don't write ourselves are advertising, and advertising costs money. Mr. Reed said we could pilot the signage for 2 weeks if it meant the freezer got fixed. The freezer did not get fixed. "Who paid for the aprons?" She made a face. "Whoever approved that invoice didn't visit a kitchen. They bought 3 sizes: small, medium, and humiliation." "Did Mr. Lyle sign any of that?" "I don't know Mr. Lyle, and I don't want to," she said. "I know Miss Caro looks through you like a window and sometimes sends extra cans with no labels and a nice note that says they know. I know Miss Vale has a phone that buzzes at dinner and a voice like a champagne cork. I know Mr. Reed tries to be decent when nobody's looking. The rest is paper, and paper burns." I asked to see the sign that had offended the pantry. She grunted and unrolled it. The sponsor name might have been fine at a ballpark. On a wall that smelled like onions and salt and patience, it looked like a billboard on a prayer. On the bottom right in small print was a line that caught my eye. "Activation coordinated by Brindle and North/S Vale." It was the kind of tag vendors add when they want to be found by the next vendor who needs a friend. I jotted it and asked if anyone had been lurking around lately, watching deliveries or counting people like they were coins. She said a man in a sedan had been parked across the street the last 2 Mondays, reading a newspaper with the care of someone pretending to read a newspaper. He had the look of a man keeping track of who kept track. I thanked her, left a donation that wouldn't make me a hero, and stepped back out to the sidewalk. The sedan was not across the street. It was 6 doors down, in a space that made no sense if you were waiting for anything except me. I strolled toward it like a man looking for a taxi. The driver didn't read his paper. He adjusted his mirror and looked at my reflection instead. The way you might look at a ghost you weren't sure you believed in. Square jaw, cheap suit that wanted to be better, hands too clean for honest work. I memorized the plate because that's the sort of thing a Boy Scout would do before he learned about girls. Then I crossed behind him and kept going like I had changed my mind about taxis. If he followed, he was good. I didn't give him a seminar. I took a left and then another and found a tobacconist with a phone booth in the back and a box of cigars in the front that would have made Wolfe hum. I dropped a dime and called the Gazette. Lon answered as if he had been waiting for a wrong number. "Do me a favor," I said. "Run a plate, GNY 342. If it's a priest, tell me he drives on Sundays. If it's a rental, tell me who owns the pen." He grunted at me for style and then came back in a minute. "Ganymede Leasing," he said. "They bleed midtown lawyers and visiting dignitaries. Pickups registered to a firm named Brindle and North. Suite on Lexington, the same as on a banner I hate." "You're welcome," he said. "Send me a sandwich." I hung up and considered whether Brindle and North was a shape for a PR boutique or a shell for something with sharper teeth. Brindle sounded like expensive fabric. North sounded like direction without destination. It smelled like Saffron Vale's handwriting, but that didn't mean she held the pen. A liaison is a bridge. Bridges don't care who walks over them as long as somebody pays for maintenance. It was after 4 when I got back home, with the day leaning forward like a man who wants to fight, but isn't sure who started it. Fritz handed me a cup that tasted like coffee, had made a truce with chocolate, and Wolfe motioned with 2 fingers, which is his way of saying I could speak if I did not burden him with adjectives. I gave him the lawn download, the kitchen, the banner, the tag, the sedan, the plate, the leasing outfit. He listened with his eyes shut, which is not indifference. It's his way of letting the words arrange themselves into furniture. When I reached the part about activation coordinated by Brindle and North/S Vale, his mouth twitched. "Of course," he said. "Do not flatter them. It is the smell of new money posing as method. Brindle and North will prove to be a house fitted inside another house. See which and the sedan." "A watchman," he said. "Possibly not yours. Possibly not theirs. Possibly the city's, which is to say, no one's. I instructed you not to stir, Saul, and you did not. That restraint may be the only useful virtue of the afternoon." "I do try," I said. "Do you want me to drop in on Brindle and North and ask them where they keep Appendix B?" "No," he said, and opened his eyes. The pupils focused to points. "At 8, Miss Vale will tell me what she has rehearsed. If I have the wrong rehearsal, she will adjust. If I have a fact she does not, she will misstep. I prefer to let her fall for free." "Then you want me to set the chairs?" He considered me as if I were furniture too. "Yes. There will be 5 for guests. The yellow chair by the corner of the desk is for Mr. Lyle." Because he asked about minutes. "Because he yearns for formality to rescue him from responsibility," Wolfe said. "He will try to put me in a ledger. I will oblige him with arithmetic. Miss Caro will sit to my left, near the globe. She cannot help glancing at power when it is round. Mr. Reed will be given the window. He will count the panes and imagine exits. Miss Vale may have the red leather chair under the books. She will enjoy the color. Mr. Tynan will stand if he has the sense of a man who knows what he is." "Which is what?" "A mechanism," Wolfe said. "Useful, replaceable, and not designed to survive the fire it starts. If he is clever, he will become water before it is over." I lugged the chairs in and placed the envelopes where he told me. Names facing down, because a name seen too early becomes an omen. He adjusted the angle on the yellow chair by a degree which might have been for comfort or for strategy. With Wolfe, it's the same. Fritz arrived with a tray that would forgive a dozen sins and then hovered long enough to make it clear he considered the evening a trespass against cuisine. Wolfe told him we would dine at 6:30, not 7, because men who lie are better handled when they have not watched you eat. At 6:30, we ate. I won't insult Fritz by describing the squab, because words would have to take their shoes off before they came near it. Wolfe allowed a second glass of beer, and then set it aside with the air of a man ending an era. He dabbed his mouth and leaned back, a general leaving the field to his lieutenants. "Goodwin," he said, "inspect the front room. Observe whether anything suggests that Mr. Tynan's paranoia has infected our furniture." I did the rounds, and if the camphor trace was still there, it had learned manners. Everything was where we left it, which is to say where Wolfe had put it once and for all. I checked the bolts and the chain, because the only thing worse than a hat inside is a hat that comes back when you're not ready to take it. When I returned, Wolfe had a small notebook open and his pencil placed diagonally across a blank page, a stage prop set for the audience. 7:30 crawled by, pretending to be a minute. At 7:40, I heard a car slow outside and keep going. At 7:48, there was a small movement on the stoop, not a knock, but the sound of a man deciding whether to pretend he had knocked and lie about it later. The bell rang at 7:51 as if time had won the argument. I went to the door and opened it to the hat. Tynan had obeyed his orders by returning and improved on them by looking like he had avoided detail, or at least believed he had. He stepped in and gave me that not-quite look of a man who wants to say thank you without paying for the word. I told him he could keep the hat in the front room until Wolfe told him he couldn't, and he parked himself where I pointed. Fritz brought water and an expression that would have curdled milk. 7:56. The first of the 4. Miriam Caro doesn't knock. The air knocks for her. She has the kind of posture that makes doors feel ashamed they have hinges. Her coat could have paid for a semester of law school, and her eyes could have found a typo in God's will. I relieved her of nothing and guided her in. She took in the office like an appraiser and said, "Mr. Wolfe," in a tone that respected him without enjoying admitting it. Prescott Lyle arrived next, on the dot of 7:58, holding punctuality like a Bible. He shook my hand with 2 fingers, as if I might steal one, and checked his watch after I let him go to make sure time had not been altered by contact with a civilian. He smiled at Wolfe with his lips and at the yellow chair with his heart. Lawson Reed came at 7:59 in some seconds, a man who carries tired the way other men carry wallets. His coat was serviceable, his shoes were good, his keenness was a hidden blade he had forgotten he owned. He saw the window and saw through it to a street that didn't care. Saffron Vale arrived at 8 o'clock in half a breath, with an apology that sounded like a toast. She wore the kind of dress that asks the room if it wants to be better and then forgives it when it says it can't. Her smile checked its reflection in every surface and then landed on me. "Darling," she said again to the universe, and I told the universe not to get ideas. I placed each envelope in each hand and each person in each chair. Wolfe didn't stand. He inclined his head at a rate that would have made a seismograph proud and let the silence gather until it had nowhere to go but down. When it dropped, it fell into his voice, which was not loud and not soft but final. "Thank you for being prompt," he said. "We will dispense with introductions because we have already been introduced, if not to one another, then to the habits that have brought you here. You have a problem. I will state it and you will correct me if I insult your intelligence. If I do not, you will listen until I invite you to speak." The door to the front room stayed closed. The hat in there might as well have been a clock. I took my place where I could watch faces without being in the way of the words, and Wolfe set his hands on the desk like the lid on a pot that was about to boil. The evening leaned forward. The room knew what it was. And for once, the thunderhead waited to see which tree it would take. Wolfe didn't warm up with throat clearing. He set his hands on the desk like a lid and said, "The purpose of this evening is to interrupt a decision you are being maneuvered to make. A contract for a sponsorship initiative will be put to a vote. The language is anodyne, the premise is pious, and the effect will be to transfer discretion from your foundation to a party that is not the public. If passed in haste, it will vest control where it is intended to be unseen." He turned his head a fraction. "If I am imprecise, you may correct me later." "Not now." Caro's chin rose a millimeter, which in her language is a protest march. Lyle shifted, one hand hovering over the yellow arm like he meant to take an oath on upholstery. Reed looked at the window and then at his shoes. Saffron Vale smiled and let the smile decide whether it wanted to stay. "You have brought your telephones," Wolfe went on. "Mr. Goodwin will give you each an envelope. Remove your device, power it down, and deposit it. There will be no signaling while I speak. If you are surgically attached to your apparatus, say so, and procure a surgeon." I passed the stout paper like communion. Caro complied briskly, as if obeying a rule she had written. Lyle made a ceremony of powering down, checking, rechecking, and sealing with 2 precise fingers. Reed fumbled his, surprised by his own clumsiness, then shrugged with a small, embarrassed grin that said he knew what he was. Saffron Vale, without looking at me, slid a phone into the envelope that had the weight of a prop and said, "Of course," in a way that made the room feel clumsy for wanting proof. I took the 4, wrote their names, and placed them on the credenza. I didn't ask about watches or second devices. I had already seen the telltale bulge in the side seam of her clutch and a ribbon of light where the clasp didn't seal. I let it ride. Wolfe likes to catch fish on their own hook. Now, he said, a pilot was attempted. Branding at a kitchen in the East 70s. The signage obstructed function, the aprons insulted dignity, and an invoice was routed through a discretionary line marked public events. Per ops, see Appendix B. There is no Appendix B. Mr. Reed swallowed. There was pressure to test visibility, he said. His voice had the wear of a man who has said there was pressure too often. We're always selling a deficit. We tried a trial. The aprons were a bad call. I didn't like the sign. The invoice coding wasn't mine. Whose was it? He made a face. Ops sent it back to finance to clarify. It came back through public liaison with the note you quoted. I assumed the treasurer had approved the lens we were putting it through. The treasurer, Wolfe said, turning a fraction to the yellow chair. Lyle smiled like a man who knows the correct etiquette for knives and forks. Discretionary lines exist for a reason, he said. We can't bring every last paperclip to the board. I saw a small outlay reclassified under a legitimate frame. I don't micromanage pilots. If the sign was poor taste, we don't repeat it. The larger question is sustainability. If a sponsor's name buys refrigeration and psychiatry for 2 years, refusing is irresponsible. Refusing money is sometimes the only responsible act left, Caro said, her voice like glass that doesn't break. We are not a stadium. We feed people. They are not surfaces. Vale crossed one knee over the other and let her shoe admire itself. This argument is older than our shoes, she said. Visibility pays. I didn't put a banner on a ladle. I coordinated a test, subject to oversights that didn't appear. If you want dignity without donors, pick one. If you want both, we do this with grace, not panic. If you want both, Wolfe said, you don't conceal the mechanism that transfers power. He motioned with 2 fingers. Mr. Goodwin. I set a page in front of each. Wolfe had scrawled a prompt that morning with leisure. Write, without your name, the one condition under which you would accept sponsorship as policy. 1 sentence. He didn't look while they wrote. He watched hands. Caro's pen moved like a metronome set to firm. Lyle's letters were accounting, exact, narrow. Reed paused twice, crossed out a word, and kept going. Vale wrote without looking down, as if the sentence had tried itself on in a mirror earlier. I collected the 4 and brought them back. Wolfe didn't read them yet. He stacked them, squared them, and set his palm on top. I asked you here, he said, because you're about to be asked to vote while being watched by someone other than one another. The watching has already begun. Mr. Goodwin, I kept it simple. A sedan outside the 70s kitchen 2 Mondays running. Today, a sedan in the neighborhood that wasn't interested in parking. Ganymede Leasing. The pickups are to a firm called Brindle and North. A pilot banner bore their name and Miss Vale's as coordinator. Vale didn't flinch. She let the room absorb coordinator, and then said, Brindle and North is a boutique I engaged to manage vendor relations. They are not villains. They keep us out of contracts that bite. If a sedan exists, it is more likely a donor's security than a conspiracy. She settled her eyes on me as if she were choosing a tie. Darling, did you take a picture of the sedan for Instagram, or did you prefer to make it ominous without evidence? Miss Vale, Wolfe said mildly, you may assume that if Mr. Goodwin intended to adorn the evening with pictures, we would be drowning in them. Now, there will be coffee. Fritz, who had been listening with the intensity of a man identifying spices by rumor, entered with a tray, the room's temperature changed by a full unit of civility. He served with his usual choreography, avoiding wrists, preventing spills by intention. I told him I would fetch another spoon, because I like a pretext when I want one, and stepped into the hall toward the kitchen. The kitchen smelled busy and orderly. Fritz doesn't allow other kinds. I crossed to the spice rack because I'm either observant or superstitious, and in that room, both are the same. He arranges by origin and heat, not alphabet. I had looked earlier. Telecherry to the left of Malabar, grains of paradise in the third column, the cayenne jar with a red ribbon because Wolfe allows it out under supervision. Now Malabar stood where Telecherry had been, by a notch. It could have been Fritz trying a new mood, only he doesn't try moods at 6 on a night when strangers are seated under his ceiling. On the swing door's brass push plate, there was a thumb smear I wouldn't have seen if the light hadn't glanced it. Dull, not grease, not soap. I put my face near it like a man appraising art. Camphor rides clean and cold. It was the same faint smell that had shadowed our visitor earlier, and that I'd caught lightly this afternoon when nothing had any business smelling like hospitals. I checked the back door out of habit, a habit Wolfe had told me to indulge. Bolt, chain, deadlock. I had set them. The bolt was shot, the lock was true, and the little chain was off its catch by an inch, as if a careful hand had lifted, paused, and then put it back wrong. I engaged it, wiped the plate with a towel, and told myself that even if Fritz had come through with a handkerchief, he would not smell like a ward. He smells like butter and pepper and scorn for poor equipment. On my way back, I passed the front room. The hat tilted in my direction, which on Tynan counted as a nod. He kept his briefcase in his lap and his eyes on nothing, which is a way of keeping them on everything. If he had left that chair, he had left without a hinge squeak. In the office, the cup sat where souls usually go when they're deciding whether to save themselves. Wolfe looked up, not asking, because he doesn't ask when the answer's in my face. I said, "Kitchen," and let the rest sit in the angle of my eyebrows. He gave one small nod, the private kind. He picked up the stack of sentences and read them without moving his mouth, then set them down. Miss Caro would accept sponsorship only if anonymity were guaranteed, and the goods received were those requested, and no others. Mr. Lyle would accept it only with restricted naming to annual reports and no physical signage, and with a sunset clause. Mr. Reed would accept with oversight at the unit level and a veto from the floor when operations are impaired. Miss Vale would accept sponsorship where it furthers mission-aligned stories with consent from impacted programs. He let the last phrase hang, tasting the air. Stories. Impact Vale's smile turned a degree. Words are the tools we have, Mr. Wolfe. Tools are chosen for what they can pry open, he said. Mr. Lyle, when was Appendix B created? Lyle smoothed his tie. If there is a missing appendix, it should be in the binder the auditors keep. The phrase may have been a placeholder. Which became a key, Wolfe said. Mr. Reed, who had a key to the 70s kitchen outside normal hours? Me and the manager, he said, and maintenance, and, during the pilot, the vendor liaison carried a duplicate so they could set up before lunch service. Brindle and North, Wolfe said. Who made the duplicate? Reed squinted as if memory were on a high shelf. I can find out. It was logged through ops. Caro cut in, smooth and hard. We can debate banners until the end of the week. What is the skulking sedan, and why are we here instead of in my office? Because my office changes liars, Wolfe said. And because while Mr. Goodwin was momentarily absent, someone in this room signaled. It was not with the telephones he placed under care. It was with another instrument or by permission of another person's device. You will be relieved to know I permit trespass to declare itself. It saves time. The room performed innocence. Reed lifted both hands, palms out, as if he could show them clean. Lyle went very still, his eyes doing a delicate dance like a man inventorying a defense he hasn't built yet. Caro's gaze slid to Saffron, because that's where gazers go when the room wants a target. Vale studied the rim of her cup, which is a good place to find a thought if you don't want to find it in your eyes. I didn't say that the clutch on the floor beside her chair had pulsed once, the faintest quiver of light along the seam, and then gone to sleep again like a cat that has been told to behave. I didn't need to. Wolfe's glance brushed it and moved on, not because he hadn't noticed, but because he prefers to pull a thing when it has wrapped itself twice around its own neck. He breathed, a short one. "There is another matter," he said. "Something in my kitchen is not where it was. It is a trifle. Trifles are the only crimes worth ranking because they are the only ones a careful man believes he will get away with. Mr. Reed, do you self-soothe by counting spice jars?" Reed blinked. No. I cook at home. I count invoices." "Of course," Wolfe said. "Miss Vale, did you see my kitchen this evening?" "Only long enough to compliment the genius who made whatever it is you fed on," she said. "I would never disturb his altars." "Mr. Lyle?" "I would never step into a kitchen I'm not insured for," he said dryly. "And I've not left this chair." Caro had the grace to shake her head. "I have stayed in the room, Mr. Wolfe. I do not sniff other people's spices." "Excellent," Wolfe said. Then someone with a camphorated hand, earlier or now, separated a chain that should not have been separated and touched a plate that should not have been touched. "Mr. Goodwin, you will telephone Mr. Panzer. He will station himself where he can see the alley and the back door, and he will advise me when a sedan, a person, or a thought parks where it should not." That made Lyle's head turn. "This was to be internal," he said. We agreed. No police. "Mr. Panzer is not the police," Wolfe said. "He is a corrective. Do not confuse restraint with absence of measures. If a crime is committed under my roof, I will stop it. If a crime is contemplated outside it with the aid of my kitchen chain, I will observe the contemplation until it becomes action or timidity." Vale's clutch pulsed again, that tiny breath of light. Her hand drifted toward it and then stopped, because stopping was smarter. She smiled at me as if we were sharing something. We weren't. I stepped to the phone on the stand by the wall, dialed, and got Saul by the third ring, because Saul is the kind of man who answers before you call. I gave him the address, the alley, the back door, the rental firm, the plate I had seen, and the fact of camphor I couldn't swear to in court but would bet a night's sleep on. He said, "Uh-huh," twice, and "all right," once, and hung up to go make the world less mysterious. Wolfe watched me finish, and then returned his attention to the stack of sentences, as if the fate of the evening was sealed in 4 lines written in different inks. "This will be simple," he said. "We will not debate virtue, only deceit. We will discuss who benefits from speed and who prepared it. We will identify who among you likes to open doors they haven't been given keys to. And we will do it before any chain is lifted again. Mr. Goodwin, bring the envelopes. We will start with Miss Vale." I fetched them. As I turned, I saw the globe out of the corner of my eye, its face not where Wolfe had left it hours ago. He prefers the Atlantic centered, not for geography, but for balance. Now the Pacific stared up at the ceiling. It was nothing a clumsy dusting couldn't cause. Fritz doesn't dust clumsy. I met Wolfe's eyes. He had seen it too. He didn't look at the globe. He looked at the people who had not touched it. Then he nodded once, like a man who has just watched the handle turn on a door he wasn't sure existed, and is pleased to have been right that it did. Wolfe let the weight of the room settle on Miss Vale without leaning. "Your envelope," he said, and I put hers on the blotter. He tapped the flap. "There are 2 phones, one for donors, one for friends. The second is either in your clutch or attended by one of the gentlemen. We will save time if you put it here." She rested a fingertip on the envelope like she was testing a pie crust. "If there were a second, Mr. Wolfe, I would put it there because I am obedient and enjoy being admired for it," she said, which was the sort of sentence that sells column inches. "There isn't." He accepted the lie as if it were a coat rack he hadn't ordered. "Very good," he said. "Brindle and North." "Vendor management," she said, bright and brisk. "They keep us from being eaten by the kinds of contracts that pretend to be free until they own your name." Yet they sent a banner that blocked a pantry door and aprons that fit no one, Wolfe said. They also lease sedans. Everybody leases sedans, she said. If a car is watching a soup line, it belongs to a donor who wants to weep in private. Caro's eyebrow lifted in a fraction that might break a man with less structural reinforcement. My donors don't weep behind glass, she said. They write checks with open eyes. Then we are all moral paragons, Vale said pleasantly, and let her smile relax half a notch. We are also out of refrigerant. Visibility, however you phrase it, buys coils. Wolfe turned the papers as if rotating a thought to face the light. Appendix B, he said. It is a phrase inserted to give timid men courage. Mr. Lyle inserted it. Lyle set his hands exactly on the arms of the yellow chair. I inserted no such thing, he said. If a form contains it, it came from Ops. I don't write their boilerplate. I ask that they justify reclassification with something I can hand an auditor without being laughed at. Ops, Wolfe said, looking at Reed with the care a surgeon gives to a healthy organ near the one he intends to remove. Reed held his ground. Ops doesn't invent authority. If we use that phrase, it's because someone upstream told us we could under certain dollar limits. We don't move money to look clever. We move it because something has to happen and we're out of time. The phrase is a key, Wolfe said. It opens a door labeled later, which is where responsibility lives when it doesn't wish to be seen. He lifted the top sheet, one of the one-sentence conditions, and let his eyes tick. Miss Vale accepts sponsorship when it furthers mission-aligned stories with consent from impacted programs. Consent is a word that keeps lawyers fed. Which program consented to the 70s pilot? She didn't blink. Which is a talent. 2 did, she said. The kitchen manager signed reluctantly, because she dislikes banners but likes freezers. The after-school program nearby signed with enthusiasm, because it needs tutors and uniforms, and learned long ago that a donor's name on a wall often buys both. The kitchen manager says she refused the banner and the aprons and never saw a freezer, I put in. She saw an invoice. She has a talent for melodrama, Vale said, meeting me with eyes that offer compliments instead of answers. She also calls everything she doesn't control advertising. We could build her a church and she would ask who owns the hymnals. Leave her alone, Reed said, the first warmth in his voice. She runs a line that would crush you in an hour. She said no for reasons that matter. And I honored no by moving the test to after school, Vale said, still sweet. If a banner leaned the wrong way, it leaned once. We are not monsters. No, Wolfe said. You are not monsters. That is precisely the difficulty. People who intend to do good often refuse to see when they have ceased doing it. He let that hang like a coat on a peg. Mr. Goodwin, open Miss Vale's clutch. She tilted her head at me as if to ask whether I liked being alive. If you prefer to be sued, darling, please open it. I will not open it, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin will place it on my desk. I took the clutch and set it near the globe. The seam pulsed, the faintest wink, and then calmed as if ashamed of itself. Wolfe's mouth twitched. He had waited for that. He didn't touch it. He said, "You will forgive my curiosity about whether any device inside it is, how do the pamphleteers put it, paired." Vale reached for innocence and put it on like a scarf. If someone is texting me, it is my dog sitter and she's worried about the rain. The evening is clear, Wolfe said. And dogs do not text. Mr. Goodwin, the telephone. It rang before I reached it. Saul does not call to chat. I picked up. Talk. Alley, he said. Sedan from Ganymede. Idled 2 minutes with lights off. Second car behind it at a distance that says they don't want to be seen together, which means they belong together. Passenger got out, no hat, cap. Walked to your back steps, didn't try the door. Stooped like a man tying his shoe and left what looks like a fat envelope under the trash lid. Both cars gone south. Plate on the second belongs to the leasing company's sister Shell. You want the envelope? I want it, I said. Wolfe was already nodding. I covered the mouthpiece. He found our mail. "Retrieve it," Wolfe said. "Do not step on the chain." I told the room I would be absent for 60 seconds and went. The alley had the kind of quiet that pretends to be honest. I cracked the back door without letting it sigh, checked the chain I had set, and eased it wider than a man of my frame likes fools to see. The envelope was exactly where Saul said. Thick, crisp, with a printed label addressed to no one. The font that boutiques choose when they want to look like discretion. Brindle and North letterhead on the flap. I brought it in with the lid of the bin because I am either careful or bored, and bored men live longer. In the office, I set it before Wolfe. He didn't pounce. He reduced it with a paper knife the way a man takes the top off a soft-boiled egg. Inside, another envelope, thinner, with 4 copies of a document, each with a tab in a different color. Underneath, one glossy card the size of a postcard, with talking points in a font for executives who think pictures are childish. The top line read, Immediate Implementation Framework. The subheading read, Appendix B. Lyle inhaled, small and sharp, and I saw his eyes do the math on how his name would look on a thing he had not admitted existed. Reed leaned forward like a man watching a fuse. Vale did not move, which was a move. Caro sat back as if she despised paper for obeying men it shouldn't. Wolfe did not read the body. He glanced over the tabs and then laid the sheets in a fan, one before each of them, the way you present cards you want the table to look at together. "Do not sign," he said. "You will read silently." He kept one copy and let his eyes graze. He hummed without sound at the clause headings. Discretionary authority vested in treasurer under a donor care rubric. Operations authorized to reclassify floor-level impediments as activation overhead. Liaison empowered to coordinate and certify consent on behalf of impacted programs. Immediate implementation upon adoption by simple majority with retroactive alignment of prior pilots. I stayed quiet. There are times to wisecrack and times to count knives. When they had read enough to decide which version of themselves they would be, Wolfe put his hand on the fan like a dealer who has changed his mind about the next round. "This was left at my back steps during our chat," he said. "Someone expects one of you to take it from here to your next place and to propose that nervous men will feel braver with a script. The tabs are color-coded to flatter each of you. Mr. Lyle, yours cites auditors. Mr. Reed, yours cites throughput. Miss Vale, yours cites narrative. Miss Caro, yours cites dignity by delimiting sponsorship to areas where donors cannot be seen, which is to say, in rooms where poor people eat." Caro's eyes flashed. "How dare?" "Exactly," Wolfe said softly. "The person who commissioned this thought you could be handled by rearranging the adjectives around your convictions." Lyle cleared his throat. "This proves nothing except that someone has been busy. It could be intemperate advocacy." "It is worse than that," Wolfe said. He slid one sheet out from the fan, the one with Vale's tab, and pointed to a footer code the size of a gnat. "Brindle and North internal reference BN-VAL-IB-2. This copy was generated today at 7:21 p.m. The courier believed he had 8 minutes to reach my step. He was in my alley at 8:19. If the person who ordered it is in this room, she asked for it during our conversation. If the person who ordered it is not in this room, he has an ally who is." Vale's smile did a thing I'd been waiting for. It turned into a spine. "If I ordered a document, Mr. Wolfe, I would not have it delivered to your back door like contraband. I would bring it with me in a folder and place it on the table like a grown woman." "Your clutch pulsed twice," I said. "Your second device is paired to a messenger who thinks like a teenager." "I have a glucose monitor," she said without missing a beat. "It pairs to a phone. It pulses when I'm about to faint. If you want me to faint on your rug, make this more insulting." Reed exhaled through his nose. "Could we not?" he said tiredly. While a meeting is happening, sneak anything. If we're going to do this, let's do it without tricks. That's what the tricks are for, Wolfe said, to show you the sort of people who expect to run you. Mr. Reed, who on your team could have requested a duplicate key for the 70's back door without routing the authorization through you? He shook his head. No one. I mean, someone could ask maintenance for a day key. They'd log it. Vendor liaison could have a duplicate for a week with my okay if I'm on site, but not without me knowing. Unless the Treasurer's office updated the policy to allow it for donor activations, I said, tapping Appendix B's third clause. Under 10,000, no ops counter-signature required. Lyle's mouth thinned. Policies are made for convenience. The proper controls remain. There is a ledger. There is also a chain on my kitchen door, Wolfe said. It was lifted by a careful hand earlier and replaced poorly. Someone tested whether the back way into my life is available. That someone smells of camphor. Mr. Tynan smells of camphor, but he has not left the front room. Therefore, the hand belonged to one of you, or to someone you permitted. I didn't glance at the globe. I didn't need to. Wolfe's eyes had the glint he gets when a triviality becomes a lever. He let the silence run its tongue around the edge of the coffee cups another moment, and then said, "We will do this neatly. Mr. Goodwin, bring Mr. Tynan in. Miss Vale, you will place your clutch on the globe and take 2 steps away. Mr. Lyle, we will call your office and ask whether they generate documents at 7:21 on Saturdays without a human hand. Miss Caro, you will read aloud the first paragraph of Appendix B as if you were teaching a class of dull boys. Mr. Reed, you will tell me which maintenance foreman at the 70's kitchen could be bribed with a lease for a new truck and why that is relevant." I went for the hat. As I reached the door to the front room, the bell pealed a single note from the stoop. One finger, held and gone. It was not the way a guest rings. It was the way a courier announces that time has been kept. I looked to Wolfe. He nodded once. The kind of nod that says a thing is exactly where he set it, and is therefore where he expected it to be when we found it. He said, "Open," and folded his hands as if to hold the roof in place while the next piece of the trap stepped over the threshold. I opened the door, prepared for anything from a pizza delivery to a gun barrel. What I got was a man in a navy suit holding another envelope, his head down as if he had been told that eye contact was taxable. He said, "Delivery for Mr. Wolfe," in the tone of a man who had repeated it too many times. No logo on the envelope, no mark but a faint trace of typewriter ribbon on the flap. I took it, told him to wait, and when he didn't move, I closed the door in his face. If he had objections, he was welcome to file them with the sidewalk. Inside, Wolfe had already leaned forward a millimeter, which for him is leaning. I set the envelope on the blotter. He sliced it with his knife and let the papers fall into his hand. These were different, not contracts, but photocopies of minutes with annotations in a hand that didn't belong to a stenographer. Each margin carried a note in sharp graphite. Exploit timidity. Leverage through ops. Align narrative to treasurer. On one, a sentence underlined twice. Secure assent by proxy. Vale as proxy signature for program consent. Another page had a scribble that looked like it had been pressed hard enough to tear. Lyle assures audit framing. Keep him comfortable. Lyle flushed the way only a man with starch in his collar does when someone has tugged the seam. "This is fabrication," he said, with a crispness he hoped sounded like law. "Anyone could forge handwriting." "Not anyone," Wolfe said. "This hand knows the cadence of your meetings. It knows where you interrupt one another and which phrases you use when bored. It is the hand of someone who has listened or been told by one who has." Saffron Vale reached for her clutch, remembered, and let her hand fall. "If you want to imply this is mine," she said, "please say so plainly so I can laugh." "You will not laugh," Wolfe said. You will explain later. Mr. Goodwin, bring Mr. Tynan. I fetched him. The hat entered first, the man after. He stood without being told, briefcase in hand. Wolfe gestured to the copies. Were these yours? Tynan bent, eyes hard, and shook his head once. Number these are from whoever is inside. My client never produced annotated minutes. That would be suicide. Suicide is popular, Wolfe said. These are for tonight, not last month. They were meant to be here in time for this gathering, so that one of you could plead necessity and pass a thing already written. Caro's voice was ice wrapped in velvet. Then one of us arranged a courier. Yes, Wolfe said, and one of you lifted my kitchen chain, and one of you thought the globe was a toy. He looked at the four of them as if deciding whether they were worth a meal. This is theater, as your intermediary said. So let us have theater. He motioned, and I distributed the annotated minutes as if they were programs at a play. Reed scanned his and muttered, Hell. Vale read hers with that bland half-smile, as if it had been written for someone else's benefit. Lyle fussed, flipping between sheets as if he could rearrange the handwriting. Caro folded hers once and laid it flat, unbent. Observe the annotations, Wolfe said. Mr. Lyle's name appears as an assurance. Miss Vale's as a proxy. Mr. Reed's role is to accept pressure when timing is invoked. Miss Caro's role is to object, so that her objection can be overruled and legitimized. It is tidy. A quadrille. One of you is both dancer and choreographer. The phone rang again, a sharp intrusion. I answered. Saw. Both cars back. Second man out, not the courier. Tall, thin, brown coat. Walked the block once, checked windows, gone east on 35th. Either he wanted to see if someone else came for the drop or he was proving to himself he could walk free. No envelope this time. Keep watching, I said, and hung up. Wolfe steepled his fingers. We are near the point. Miss Caro, you pride yourself on integrity. Did you object to the sponsorship initiative in language sharp enough to make enemies? I objected with the language that truth requires, she said. If that made enemies, they are enemies I welcome. Then you are scripted to be overruled, Wolfe said. Mr. Lyle, you enjoy frameworks. Have you ever provided one quietly, to ease the conscience of your fellows? Never, Lyle snapped. Frameworks are useless unless acknowledged. Secret ones are lies. Then your name was used, Wolfe said. Mr. Reed, you are weary. Weary men are convenient. Would you have yielded to pressure? Reed met his eyes. A rare thing. Not if it cost the line. I'd quit before I let a sponsor write my pantry. Then your fatigue was mistaken for weakness, Wolfe said. Miss Vale. She lifted her chin. Say it. You like stories. You believe they change outcomes. You would gladly place your name as consent if you thought the story required it. She smiled like a stage light. And that proves what? That I am effective. That proves, Wolfe said, that whoever wrote these minutes counted on you most, and that whoever it is not you, because you are too vain to write yourself in pencil. She laughed, soft and sharp. Touché. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward me. Mr. Goodwin, open her clutch. She made a noise halfway between protest and amusement, but I already had it on the desk. I popped the clasp. Inside, a lipstick, 2 cards, a small silver phone, the second device, and a glucose monitor, blinking like a conscience. Wolfe pointed. Paired. I switched it on, a single thread of messages. Drop delivered. Minutes left. Then, proceed to next phase if resistance continues. Timestamp, 8:29. Sent to a number flagged only as BN/control. Vale's smile faltered at the edge, the first crack. So someone texts me without asking. That proves nothing. It proves everything, Wolfe said. Because you should have destroyed it the moment you saw it. Instead, you left it to pulse. You wanted it seen. You wanted to prove you are central. She breathed in once, steadied. And what if I did? Better me than someone hiding. Reed slapped his copy down. This is madness. If any of us were selling the place to sponsors, we'd know. Who benefits? Not me. Not Caro. Not Vale if she wants to be admired. Not Lyle unless he's lost his mind. All heads turned to Lyle. He sat stiff, color blotching his cheeks. Ridiculous, he said. My life is numbers. I don't risk audit for this folly. Wolfe closed his eyes. You do if someone else has promised you elevation, Mr. Lyle. You do if Brindle and North has told you that by shepherding Appendix B through as a minor note, you will later be remembered as the one who provided legitimacy. You do if timidity is your comfort and applause, your secret hunger. You are not the thief of dignity, Mr. Lyle. You are the cover. Caro said coldly, Then who is the thief? Wolfe opened his eyes. The one who lifted my chain, the one who shifted my globe, the one who required a courier because vanity insists on risk. The one who cannot resist being central. Miss Vale, your device pulses not because you are innocent, but because you demanded it. You wanted to be the hub. You are the thief. Her smile held half a second more before it dropped. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and let the silence accept her. And if I am, she said, you think you can drag me to the police with annotated minutes and a banner? No law broken, not yet. No, Wolfe said, but an attempt, and conspiracy with a shell firm to defraud a foundation, and trespass in my kitchen, enough to end your standing, and that, for you, is worse than prison. The hat moved. Tynan stepped forward, voice gravel. My client will press it. Vale's eyes cut to him. Your client doesn't exist. You're a ghost with a scar. And ghosts, Wolfe said, have a way of haunting. Miss Vale, you will resign your liaison position before the week is out. You will release Brindle and North from contract with a statement that they exceeded scope. You will be silent about this meeting. If you do not, I will place these papers and your device and my observations into hands that will make them live on every page tomorrow. She laughed again, but this time it was the laugh of someone who knows she is lost and wants it to look like she meant to. Well played. I wondered why the hat insisted on this room. Because liars collapse in my office, Wolfe said. The evening paused there, on the edge of collapse. Caro gathered her papers, with a precision that looked like disgust. Reed rubbed his eyes. Lyle sat like he was waiting for a train to run over him. Vale uncrossed her legs, stood, and smoothed her dress. Darling, she said to me on her way to the door, if you ever get bored of being the straight man, call me. I said I preferred my hats removed indoors. She smiled once more, and was gone. Wolfe leaned back, shut his eyes, and murmured, Fritz, beer. The brownstone had been violated, but the order was returning, one bottle at a time. If you've ever watched a room breathe out after the main suspect leaves, you know it's not relief. It's the kind of air that checks its pockets to see what's missing. Vale's perfume was gone, but her fingerprints were still on the conversation. Lyle's collar needed a lawyer. Reed's shoulders wanted a wall. Caro had decided where her raid should be sent, and it wasn't to the printer. Wolfe didn't let the silence think for itself. Miss Caro, Mr. Lyle, Mr. Reed, remain. Mr. Tynan, here. He didn't point. He doesn't point. He makes nouns behave. Tynan stopped near the corner of the desk, brim shadowing the scar that had justified the hat when he first arrived. The hat wasn't the problem anymore. The hat was a character with too many lines. Fritz brought beer, and Wolfe ignored it, which is how you know he was in a mood. First, he said, we separate theatre from trespass. Theatre is annotated minutes and couriers at the door. Trespass is my kitchen chain lifted and my globe displaced. Whoever did those had already been here, and not as a guest. Reed frowned. Your kitchen is not public, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin has told me what he smelled on the brass. Camphor. Our visitor this morning wore it like absolution. The hat tilted a hair. I sat in the front room, Tynan said. Your man knows it. I know you sat there, I said. I don't know where you stood before you rang the bell the first time, or after you left and before you came back. I left and came back, he said. And in between, Wolfe murmured. A careful man with a camphorated hand lifted a chain and touched a plate. When Mr. Goodwin inspected at my instruction this afternoon, he smelled the remnant. When he checked during coffee, he smelled it again. Tynan didn't blink. You think I would risk? Yes, Wolfe said. Because you already demanded we host a meeting under terms you dictated, and because men who move other men like pieces always think a house will forgive them. You're not stupid. You're used to being indulged. Caro's gaze cut to him. Who sent you, Mr. Tynan? He kept it simple. A client. A client who can't afford to be named, Lyle put in, finding his backbone where he keeps his cufflinks. That is often how clients survive, Tynan said. Wolfe shifted his eyes to me. Goodwin. The Globe. He didn't say what he wanted me to do because saying would have spoiled the line. People assume globes are spheres on sticks. Fritz dusts ours with a brush that respects continents. I lifted it gently by the meridian and turned it. Wolfe prefers the Atlantic centered. Today the Pacific was up like a bad idea. The screw at the north axis showed a bright crescent of fresh metal. Either Fritz had turned into the sort of man who uses a screwdriver to express himself, or someone had been nosy with a purpose. I set it down, slid my finger along the equator seam, and felt grit where there should be polish. There was something soft under the ring. Gum, not Fritz's. I eased the meridian off the pivots and raised the globe a fraction, enough to make a housekeeper faint. A wafer the size of a nickel clung to the inner shell with clean adhesive, a thin black disc with a wire as fine as a hair, kissing the hole someone had bored at the seam through the map of the South Pacific. It would have looked like a pinprick to anyone admiring Fiji. I didn't say bug, because this is not a radio show. I held it up where light could answer the question we weren't asking. Lyle inhaled. Reed swore under his breath. Caro's mouth tightened to a straight edge that could cut rope. Tynan's brim did not move. Wolfe spared it one glance. You placed that, he said. No, Tynan answered. Then you arranged for it to be placed, Wolfe said. By someone who knew how to lift a chain and who thought a kitchen is a hallway. Tynan's jaw decided not to be bait. You're the one who announced a meeting worth hearing. There is no meeting worth hearing in my house unless I permit it, Wolfe said. And I did not. He set the wafer gently on the blotter, not like evidence, like refuse. You wore your hat because your bandage hides an earpiece. You insisted on terms because your masters wanted to be certain their feed was uncontaminated by law. You brought annotated minutes to make my office complicit in inevitability. When inevitability failed, you delivered more paper to cover your tracks. You are not the thief Miss Vale is. You are the courier for a larger appetite. If there is an earpiece, Tynan said, calm as brick. Search me. No, Wolfe said, as if the suggestion had been profane. I'm not a bailiff. I'm a man in a chair. I do not paw at hats. I make them remove themselves. Remove it. He said it without volume, but with enough history behind it to make a stubborn man want to be remembered for common sense. Tynan's hands went up and stopped an inch from the brim. I watched his knuckles. They weren't scared. They were deciding. He set the briefcase on the floor and tipped the hat up. The dressing was real and fresh, the scar angry, the tape clean. Behind the ear, a flesh-colored bud nestled like a lie that had been told often enough to sound domestic. Satisfied, he said, which was a poor choice of word in that room. Acquainted, Wolfe corrected him again, with your habits. The phone on the stand gave us Saul. Your boy in brown came back with a friend. They're arguing about who walks to the alley first. Then, hold it, one lights a cigarette for timing. If they are smart, they are leaving their smarts in the ashtray. You want charity, or you want a hello? Charity, I said. Let them perform for their invisible audience. Note plates. If they touch the back step, cough. Copy, he said, and hung up to go be everywhere. Lyle leaned forward. Mr. Wolfe, I object to being trapped in a room where unlawful surveillance is occurring. You preferred being trapped in a room where lawful deception was occurring, Wolfe said. Sit. Caro angled her chin toward Tynan. If you have been facilitating for our enemies, why bring us here at all? He answered her, not apologizing. Because the alternative was to watch you walk into a vote blind. Because my client didn't want the structure burned, only the arsonist's match taken. Because you need leverage, and Mr. Wolfe is leverage. That line, I said, belongs in a recruiting brochure. He didn't look at me. The scar pulsed once under the tape. Say, you can despise me later. We will, Wolfe said. For the record, whom do you serve? My client would prefer. Your client, Wolfe said, has no preferences here. You are a vector. Give me a noun. Miriam Caro, he said. I watched the room rearrange itself. Reed's head snapped to her. Lyle's eyes lost their place and went hunting for the index. Caro's expression didn't change, but things behind it did. You're lying, she said. And if there's a way to make the alphabet curtsy, she did. No, Tynan said. Your steward hired me. He did not tell you because he thought you would refuse to stoop. I was told to prevent the vote or to kill it without destroying the board. If Miss Vale took the fall, so be it. If Mr. Lyle shrank, so be it. If Mr. Reed resigned from fatigue, so be it. The work would continue under you, efficient, refocused, without narrative. Caro didn't blink. I'll give her that. She didn't perform surprise or indignation. She set her hands on the arms of the chair and said, Name. Latham, Tynan said. Your counsel. She made a small sound that wasn't a word. He plays chess, she said. I told him once that chess is a metaphor for cowards. She stood, sat again, and didn't apologize for it. If he hired you, he did it without authority. It is what stewards do when they believe they're saving you from yourself, Tynan said. You don't have to be grateful. She wasn't and didn't pretend. Mr. Wolfe, if this man speaks truth, he trespassed at my direction without my knowledge. If he lies, he does it for Miss Vale's friends. Either way, I don't like breathing the same air. Nor do I, Wolfe said, but air is communal. We ration it through judgment. He turned his head a fraction toward me. Mr. Goodwin, telephone Mr. Latham. Ask him whether he hired a man named Tynan to save Miss Caro from philanthropy. I dialed, got velvet reception that wanted to guard the gate, and used a tone that works on hinges. Latham came on cool and faintly amused, the way men are when their socks match their tie. I gave him the question without ribbons. There was the tiniest pause. Not for ethics, for calculation. We employ consultants, he said. If one has acted rashly, so yes, I said. Thank you. I hung up on his forms and told Wolfe the word he wanted. Very well, Wolfe said. So the hat is not wholly malignant. It is simply servile. That complicates our disgust, but not our remedy. Miss Caro, your steward hired a meddler. He meddled. He brought me trouble. I prefer beef. Reed pushed his hands through his hair until fatigue remembered it was supposed to sit down. Where does that leave the rest of us? Veil gone. Appendices a trick. The sedan out front. Donors probably on a chain. Do we start over? You stop, Wolfe said. You issue a notice that all sponsorship discussions are suspended pending a review of operational impact. You state that prior pilots exceeded the consent of impacted programs. You remove Brindle and North and any shells. You require that any reclassification under discretionary lines be ratified by a full board tally with a 2/3 threshold and no retroactivity. You audit the keys to every door you pretend is public. Lyle found something like courage under his regret. I can draft that by morning. You will draft it now, Wolfe said. Here, Mr. Goodwin will produce paper. Mr. Reed will supply the list of units that can veto a sticker. Miss Caro will attach her name first. Caro inclined her head. With pleasure. And Mr. Tynan, Wolfe said, will sit and compose a message to BN/control explaining that the attempt failed, that the proxy has recanted, that any further delivery will be received by hands you do not want to know. He will send it from the device Miss Vale forgot to empty, because whoever receives it needs to understand that her usefulness has expired. Tynan considered the ethics of his hairline and then nodded once. You will send it, he said to me, so that if the sky falls, it kills both of us. That's charitable, I said, and fetched paper and a pen and the little silver phone that had wanted attention all evening. My thumbs aren't built for confessions, but I can type, the play failed. Board suspending. Stop deliveries. Delete caches. Do not approach Brownstone again. I showed it to Wolfe. He nodded. I sent it. The device blinked once and settled like a dog that has accepted it is not fed in this house. Saul rang. Our twins took a lap south and decided they live east. The brown coat looked back at your windows twice like they owed him money. If he comes again, he comes with a hammer. He won't, I said. Tell me if he looks up and smiles. He won't do that either, Saul said. He's not built for humor. Thank you, I said and hung up. We got to work. It isn't a word I use often in that room. Wolfe does ideas and outcomes, not sweat. But this was ink and structure. Lyle drafted like a man, writing apology disguised as policy. Reed mumbled unit names and practical carve-outs between sips of cooling coffee. Caro found sentences that wore steel corsets. Fritz hovered in the doorway with a dish rag, and the look a duelist gives a man who offers him a handshake. Wolfe watched and edited with eyebrows. Tynan didn't move until his part was done. Then he held the hat in his hands, which is practically genuflection for him. If I'm a vector, he said to Wolfe, do you wish me removed from the board's orbit? I am not a bailiff, Wolfe said again. You will be removed if Miss Caro prefers it. She will. You will accept that your bandage does not entitle you to privacy in my house. You will accept that I dislike you because you used me and were sloppy, but you may tell your client that the thing he feared has been delayed. Do not congratulate one another. Delay is not victory. It is a breather between mistakes. Caro signed the draft. Reed initialed. Lyle put his name down after a small visible war with himself, and something like relief afterward. I made 3 copies because I have seen originals disappear when people are proud of them. Wolfe let the paper sit as if the room needed to be sure they existed without applause. He finally reached for his beer as if it had re-earned the right to be consumed. Mr. Goodwin, he said, restore the Atlantic. I set the globe back with the ocean where he liked it, and the room looked correct again. It's a small thing, but small things are the only ones that ever stay. Tynan asked, may I go? Wolfe didn't bother to look at him. You may leave my house, he said. Going is a bigger question. He went. I watched the door close behind the hat and thought about the camphor and the chain and the little wafer that had wanted to listen to men who don't need help saying too much. Reed rubbed his face. Caro straightened her coat. Lyle collected what remained of his dignity and stapled it to his folder. Wolfe eased back, letting the chair take his weight the way a mountain lets a valley exist. Tomorrow, he said to the room, you will tell yourselves a story about how you were rescued. Do not. You rescued nothing. You deferred an indecency and agreed to stand guard. If you stop standing, the indecency will return with a larger vocabulary. He closed his eyes. for a blink, not a nap, and then opened them. "Mr. Goodwin will see you out." I did. The hall felt like a throat that had been cleared. At the door, Caro paused. "Thank you," she said, like a woman who doesn't often let the words out to play. Reed said he'd send the list tonight. Lyle said nothing, and looked like he might sleep for the first time this year. The street took them one by one. When I got back, Wolfe had the wafer on the blotter, and he was regarding it the way a gardener regards a slug, not with fury, with policy. He lifted his beer, took an inch, and set the glass down with a sigh that belonged to a man considering whether to forgive his species again. "People," he said, "like to convince themselves they are necessary to what they spoil." "That includes us," I said. "Yes," he admitted, "which is why we must sit very still while we disabuse them, and then eat." Fritz, who had learned to track the moment a storm becomes weather, arrived with a plate of something that tasted like the word reprieve. The brownstone began, inch by inch, to return to itself. I could still smell the camphor if I tried. I decided not to. If there's a proper way to end a night like that, I don't know it. The wafer on the blotter looked innocent the way snakes in picture books look innocent. Wolfe let the beer work on his disposition while Fritz pretended the universe hadn't tried to use his kitchen as a corridor. I had just decided to invent an errand to the front room so I could be sure the hat had truly left when the little silver phone, that dainty second device from Vale's clutch, gave a single, tremulous buzz on the desk. Wolfe flicked his eyes. I looked at him. He said, "Well," with a tone that meant, "Don't be tedious." I opened the thread. BN/control had opinions. "Status?" it asked, like a doctor checking a pulse it had paid for. I typed, "Board suspends." "Deliveries stopped. Retrieval tonight." I kept it clean. The reply was instant. "Copy. Retrieval 2330. 35th Street same. Debrief nulla petnast." Wolfe took his beer, 1/8 of an inch, and set it down. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "return the reptile to its hole. You want the bug back in the globe. I want men who sneak to be encouraged," he said. "We will provide them with the illusion of success. Restore the meridian. Leave the chain on the back door as you set it. Place the wafer precisely where you found it. Then speak, in here, in a tone intended for microphones." He closed his eyes and composed the bait like a menu. "Say, in the morning at 9 we will convene with Miss Caro, Mr. Lyle, Mr. Reed, and counsel. We will finalize the suspension language and discuss the donor list that must be purged. Repeat the phrase donor list twice, as if you mean to cut anyone whose name could be traded." I put the wafer back. It felt like tucking a snake into bed and telling it a story. I said the lines at the proper volume and added a garnish about a shredded Appendix B that I intended to burn in the sink. Wolfe gave me a weary nod and told the sink it wasn't personal. At 23:25, Saul called. "Your friends arrived early to practice leaving," he said. "2 of them. Brown coat and a new one in a navy peacoat, whose collar says he read the weather report. They took a walk around your alley the way children do before they steal apples. Want me to cough when their hands go where hands shouldn't?" "Not yet," I said. "Let them work for once." We sat. The brownstone knows how to hold still. At 23:32, the back door hinges murmured just enough for a man who loves doors to sigh in his sleep. A minute later, Saul's cough came over the wire, discreet as a footman dropping a spoon. "They have your toy," he said. Browncoat palmed it. Navy man kept time, both leaving east. I'll see where. "Discretion," Wolfe murmured. "We do not want them nervous. We want them punctual. Let them deliver. Let Mr. Panzer deliver us." I hung up and gave Wolfe the news. He made a face at the word toy and told me to bring a second beer as a note of thanks to the gods of competence. We waited again. A house has a different quiet when you've allowed someone to lift a piece of it. It isn't fear. It's something closer to contempt. I don't recommend it as a hobby. At midnight, Saul again. They're good at walking and bad at vanishing, he said. Brown took the wafer into a building on Lex with a directory that wants to be expensive. Suite on the 3rd floor with frosted glass and the kind of fern you rent. Name on the door, Brindle and North, in letters that believe in minimalism. Navy man posted by the elevator and looked fierce at no one. At 12:15, a man with a cardigan over a shirt that cost more than the rent appeared and scolded them with his eyes. He took the wafer, disappeared, came back with a folder, and everyone nodded like they had solved something. Want a name? If they wrote it on his forehead, I said. Cardigan had a plaque on a credenza with C North on it, Saul said. If he's Brindle, he's wearing a disguise. Thank you, I said. Don't get domestic. Wouldn't dream, he said, and went to stand in a place where men like North forget the air belongs to other people. Wolfe digested that. Tomorrow, he said, we will entertain a cardigan. I didn't say that entertaining cardigans often leads to dry mouth. I asked who we wanted in the room. He said, Miss Caro, because primacy must be restored with ceremony. Mr. Lyle, because he must accept structures that make it difficult for him to be useful to villains. Mr. Reed, because he must remember he is permitted to be strong in the morning. Mr. Latham, because stewards must be scolded in front of their principals occasionally. Mr. North, because he is certain he is necessary. Mr. Tynan is unnecessary. Tynan will appear anyway if the hat believes it owns the aisle. Then the hat will be collected at the door and returned to its owner in a bag, Wolfe said. Call at 8:45. Insist. I made the calls, using the tone that gets you seatings and signatures. Caro accepted at once, and if she had anything to say to Latham, she reserved it for a smaller room. Lyle said he would bring a revised draft of the policy, which suggested he had made peace with himself for the night. Reed said he would bring a list that would make donors swallow. Latham was smooth and tried to propose his office. I told him his office had poor acoustics. When I reached Brindle and North and asked for Mr. North, a receptionist oozed regret until I said Nero Wolfe. Then the regret put on better shoes and promised to locate him before breakfast. They say names have power. Some of them do. We slept like people who prefer it. At 8:30, Wolfe finished with the orchids and evaluated an omelette as if it had applied for admission. At 8:40, he inspected the office and the Globe and approved of the Atlantic's posture. He instructed Fritz to deny entry to anyone smelling of camphor, which is a standard I wouldn't mind seeing on public transit. At 8:50, the bell announced Miss Caro and a wind that had found its manners. Latham came with her, neat and grey and futile. Reed arrived at 9 on the dot with a folder and a face that suggested he had dusted his conscience. Lyle huffed in behind, carrying a document like a fragile vase. At 9:08, the frosted glass we don't have slid in my imagination, and a cardigan materialized, in fact. Mr. North, new fern in the shape of a man, clean features, a part you could set a ruler against, a smile that knew how to be sincere for 90 seconds. Mr. Wolfe, he said, with the warmth of a man who has hated a dozen men named Wolfe and learned nothing. Caleb North, we regret last night's confusion. Do not anthropomorphize events, Wolfe said. Confusion regretted nothing. It was used. Sit. North sat with the confidence of a man who sells confidence. Latham chose a chair with good sight lines and began rehearsing excuses under his breath. Caro took the seat by the Globe and faced the ocean like an admiral. Reed stood until told to sit, a small, honest reflex that made me like him. Lyle set his draft where Wolfe's pen could reach it and pretended not to hope for approval. Wolfe began without preface. Mr. North, he said, you placed a listening device in my Globe. Your agents lifted my kitchen chain and tested my back door. You delivered annotated minutes instructing one of these people to be overruled and another to be made complicit. You did this at the request of no law, under the cover of no necessity, with the excuse of narrative. You will tell the room who pays you, in what amount, and what promises you made to them that required this indecency. North's smile adjusted to a setting labeled cooperative. We manage integrations, he said. We prevent donor fatigue by helping mission partners articulate value. Occasionally, we overstep in zeal. If a contractor placed a device, it was an error of judgment by someone who thought monitoring would reduce surprises. We regret. Stop, Wolfe said, and the vowel ricocheted like a clean slap. You regret being in a chair opposite me. You regret that the men you sent last night retrieved only what I wished them to retrieve. You do not regret your premise. Spare us your catechism. Name your sponsor. North had rehearsed the next line too. We don't disclose clients. You will hear, Wolfe said. Or I will mail a wafer to a rival agency with a note that says you were clumsy in a house you could not afford to enter. Do not imagine you are the only people who sell propriety to rich men. Latham made a noise. Caro didn't look at him. She looked at North and spoke to me. When men are this smooth, she said, I want a blunt instrument. Wolfe sighed. You have one, he said, and nodded at me. North's eyes took my measure. I'm not a blunt instrument unless you make me. I smiled at him and said, the sedan plates are yours, the courier's shoes are yours, the minutes say Appendix B in a font your designer uses for stage directions, and the wafer likes your office at midnight. If there is an innocent explanation, I would hire it to do children's parties. He let the smile drop. My respect for him went up 2 inches. Faro Foods, he said. You've eaten their crackers. They want credit for salt. They told us to secure a narrative that places them close to mouths. We proposed integrated storylines and benign signage. Your Miss Vale understood. The rest of you do not. Caro said, if you speak the phrase close to mouths again, I will demonstrate the concept of distance. Faro Foods, Wolfe repeated, tasting it. A national sponsor that considers its name a nutrient. Of course, and you were to be their midwife. North shrugged the exact fraction prescribed by his training. We make engines run. Engines don't apologize to the road. Reed said, soft. People aren't engines. Indeed, Wolfe said. Mr. North, you will leave this house having signed a statement that Brindle and North regrets overreach, terminates all engagements with his foundation, and will not engage in any project that places surveillance in private homes. You will then go back to your fernery and inform Faro Foods that they may place their name on billboards and ballparks and the sides of blimps, but not on the dignity of rooms where hungry men eat. If you do not, I will instruct Mr. Goodwin to give your devices to men who specialize in public hygiene. North tipped his head. You can't enforce that. I enforce it by boring you, Wolfe said, by producing a story you cannot sell. A story in which men like you wear hats you do not dare remove because underneath is the boldness of appetite. I assure you, I'm very boring when I choose to be. Lyle coughed into a sentence. The draft? He said to the ceiling, and handed Wolfe his policy like a child showing a report card. Wolfe read, made 2 changes, and handed it to Caro. Acceptable, he said. Add the clause about program veto. It's in paragraph 3, Lyle said, almost proud. Then you may keep your tie, Wolfe told him. Latham cleared his throat. He had been creaking his conscience like a door you oil too late. Miss Caro, he said, I apologize for engaging outside assistance without your knowledge. I feared that I would do what I did, she said, refuse to be handled. Yes, he said, giving her the one honest thing on his person. You're done, she said. Collect your chessmen. He didn't argue. I've seen men choose unemployment with less grace. Reed slid his list across the desk. Units with veto, he said. And the maintenance foreman who loaned a day key to a vendor liaison last week. Ortiz. He likes his truck. He wants a new one. I'll talk to him. He can like a new job instead. If he is salvageable, salvage him, Wolfe said. If not, dismiss him and let him salvage his life elsewhere. He looked at North. You like language. Here is some. Leave. North stood, gathered what was left of Ifern, and tried the smile one more time. It didn't crack, but it didn't catch either. You are very sure of yourself, he said. No, Wolfe said. I am very sure of my chair. North went. Latham asked if he should follow. Caro told him to go somewhere he could read quietly for a year. Reed looked like a man who had found the window was actually a wall and was relieved. Lyle breathed in a way that might become confidence, later, if not abused. When they were gone, the room loosened. Wolfe leaned back, pressed his fingertips together, and let that long exhale ration the air. You will note, he said, that no one apologized for wanting to be adored. They apologized for being caught. That is the commonest morality of our time. You're cheerful, I said. I am fed, he said, which is the only cheerfulness I trust. The bell rang again. Once, like a punctuation mark, I went. The hat had returned. Tynan without drama, the brim lower, the bandage clean. He held up both hands empty. Report, he said, and I almost smiled, because the man was so well trained he couldn't help making a noun a command. Tell it to Mr. Wolfe, I said, and brought him in. He listened while I gave the précis. When I finished, he nodded in that blocky way and said, Then my client got what he wanted. No vote. No burn. Wolfe regarded him without affection. Your client, Miss Caro's steward, will now confine himself to stewarding. If he wishes to produce another hat in my house, he may purchase seats. Tynan's eyes went to the jar of beer nuts on the side table, and then to me. I'll be out of your life, he said. A compliment. It is, I said. We don't hand them out with aprons. He touched the brim, not lifting it, saluted exactly once, and left. The door closed on the camphor and on the evening and on the little wafer that had wanted to be the smartest thing in the room. Fritz came in with lunch, like forgiveness. Wolfe let the scent reset his idea of humanity. Mr. Goodwin, he said, observe. Men who sell philanthropy to sponsors will always insist that their names are misspelled in the newspapers. Good thing we don't read, I said. We read everything, he said, and reached for the knife. We simply refused to believe most of it. He cut carefully. The house had found its breathing again. Outside, a fern wilted somewhere, and a set of minutes tried very hard to be born as policy, and instead was folded into a drawer. The globe shone with its ocean in the right place. If someone wanted to put their ear to it, they would hear nothing but geography. Wolfe took a bite and shut his eyes. He was not content. He was finished with this part, which is the nearest he comes. There's a rhythm to the brownstone after a storm. It isn't quiet. It's the sound of a house remembering itself. Fritz reset the kitchen like a priest putting candles back. Wolfe took the wafer's absence as a personal compliment to gravity and turned his chair 2 degrees toward the window, which is as near as he comes to thanking the sun for showing up. I was about to call Lon and sell him nothing at a premium when Lon called to buy it. You've made friends, he said, the kind of cheerful that ends men's careers. Describe the kind of friends so I know whether to send flowers or a lawyer. A boutique whose name sounds like an English law firm and a cereal aisle had a baby, he said. They're shopping a press note. In pursuit of transparency and stakeholder alignment, the foundation engaged outside experts to facilitate a governance refresh. Translation, you, no names, but the phrase, a respected midtown venue, is doing a lot of work. They plan to leak a feel-good about a sponsorship framework that centers dignity. I've seen the draft. It makes dignity sound like a coat check. If respected Midtown venue turns into our address on page 2, I'll bring you a hat and make you eat it. I can chew felt, he said. Do you want me to spike it, or do you want it to land and then cry? You'll keep it in your pocket, I said. If they float it, you will discover your standards. Meanwhile, tell your ear that if a national snack wants to baptize soup, it should buy a church. Lon made a noise I filed under goodwill and hung up to go be the type of friend whose loyalty is measured in column inches. I found Wolfe with his eyes shut, which didn't mean he was napping. He was arranging adjectives. They intend to sanctify refresh, I reported. Lon smells starch. Of course he does, Wolfe said. Starch is their sacrament. Mr. Goodwin, you will fetch Mr. Reed's foreman, Ortiz, and tell him that a new truck is cheaper than a prison bunk. Will you be tipping in for the truck? I will be tipping in with the invitation to honesty, he said. He may purchase the truck by earning your pity. I pitied Ortiz at the 70s kitchen enough to give him a head start. He was in his office, which was a chair by a mop sink and a pegboard with keys. He had the broad face of a man who has carried crates long enough to know what one looks like when you can't. He tried a frown on me and decided it fit. If you're here with the banner again, take it to the river, he said. I'm here with arithmetic, I told him. You loaned a day key to a vendor liaison last week outside the log. You took 2 20s and a promise about a demo truck you could test. You thought it was harmless. Now you're a sentence in a report. Do you like reports? He wet his lips. It was a key for a day, he said. They said they had to stage a photo for a sponsor the next morning. I didn't give a copy, He stopped because just is the police tape word men put around their guilt so no one trips. I kept the log for day keys, he tried. You can look. The log had an entry with a neat B&N liaison and a signature that said the writer had gone to schools with good football teams. Under purpose, the words activation prep had been written dark enough to dent. There was also a sticky note with a phone number and the name Avery, which is the kind of name someone gives you when they want to be 2 syllables you won't remember. Did you see the liaison? I asked. Brown coat, he said. Nice hair. The other one stayed in the car. Said he was timing the route. You didn't call Mr. Reed. He was out. I called his deputy. She said if it was for Miss Vale, it was fine. Was it? His jaw shifted like a man moving a stone with his tongue. She talks fast, he said. She makes you think you're late to your own life. I told him he could keep the job if Reed trusted him, and the trust started 5 minutes ago. He nodded like a man trying to learn to nod. I took a picture of the log and the sticky for our wall of shame and left him with his keys looking like a man who had just picked the locksmith over the pawn shop. Out on the sidewalk, a woman in a pea-coat that could pay my rent asked me if I knew where the nearest train was. She didn't want a train. She wanted to see whether I'd give her my face with context. I said west and kept moving. The city was full of people who wanted to be scenery in my story. It was getting crowded. Back home, Wolfe had let 2 inches of newspaper accumulate on his desk without turning a page. He does that when he wants to show paper how trivial it is. I gave him Ortiz, the log, and Avery. He said "puis" at the sticky note like it had personally offended Latin and then dialed. He asked for Mr. Reed and asked him to put Ortiz on a leash that smelled like a second chance. He told Lyle to bring the draft by 2 with a clause that made discretionary reclassifications the jurisdiction of a committee that likes to say no. He told Miss Caro that her steward had to return a retainer that had bought a hat. He did it in fewer words than that, but with enough subtext to drown a man. Saul called with dessert. Your fern shed leaves, he said. Brindle and North has a trash bag full of paper snow. They're doing winter in August. North's secretary carried a carton out back that rattled like old chargers. Then Miss Vale went in through the front door wearing sunglasses and came out the side without them. She had a box, too. If you want to guess whether it's the box with her desk plant or somebody's head, make it a quick guess. Where did she go? Taxi south, he said. I think she's aiming for a donor before noon to pitch the "I was the adult in the room" speech. I can sit on her shoulder if you feel sentimental. Sit on the donor, Wolfe said when I relayed. The donor who believes stories are reality. Pharaoh. Saul hummed. A man in a suit with a comb that could draw blood, he said. Lobby on Madison, floor of glass, receptionist with teeth. I can put a shoe in a door. Put a proverb in a door, Wolfe said. Tell him if he buys a headline today, he will eat it tomorrow. Saul grunted and went to go tell men who drink branded water that it is still water. At 1:45, Lyle arrived with a draft that looked like it had been ironed through a napkin. He handed it to Wolfe with the reverence of a man offering up a unique stamp and waited. Wolfe read without moving his mouth. He nodded once. Remove the phrase "best practices," he said. It is a lie. Replace it with "procedures." They will hate it, which is why it is correct. He signed "satisfactory" on the cover with his initials, which made Lyle stand up straighter by a quarter inch, and remember he had a spine. Reed followed with a list of units and a sentence for each that read like a man who had looked his work in the face. The pantry can veto signage, he said, and the line supervisor can veto any activation that collides with service. If they don't like the word activation, they can call it a nuisance and it still counts, and the liaison has to be in the building to witness consent. No more proxy lines. Good, Wolfe said, language that makes lying hard. While Wolfe was grading men, Lon called back with a hornet in his hands. They're pushing it, he said. North's ghost sent the governance refresh note to 3 outlets and a blogger who thinks he invented soup. One outlet bit. The blogger wants blood. He heard the phrase, "a detective's home," and is writing sonnets. Spare him the second stanza, I said. Print a line. Plans paused pending operational review and program consent. Use program consent twice. It makes donors itch. You're asking me to be dull, he said. You'll win prizes, I said. Tell them the pause is because some people still have taste. Lon sighed. I'll dress it as righteousness, he said, and rang off to do God's work as a journalist, being boring until villains yawn and confess. At 2:30, Miss Caro appeared without weather. She had a check in her hand with Latham's name on it and a face that had been sharpened for use. She thanked Wolfe in a way that left no room for words and told Lyle to file the draft like it was the Magna Carta. Reed stood to receive a nod that added an hour of sleep to his week. When they left, I said we were going to get away with it. Wolfe gave me the look a man gives a boy who has declared winter is over because the thermometer is in a good mood. Do not confuse reprieve with rescue, he said. Rescue is survived. Reprieve requires posture. We are not postured yet. His posture improved when the bell rang, and Fritz did not have to look at me to tell me that the second seating of the afternoon would smell like compromise. I opened the door to a man who had the look of a machine that had discovered it was made of meat. If you have ever seen a general counsel after a bad memo, you know the species. F. Brands, Pharaoh's legal, handed me a card engraved with debt and asked for Mr. Wolfe as if he were requesting a glass of water from a man who owned a river. We gave him a chair. He didn't waste our time. We intend to continue supporting the foundation, he said. We also intend to avoid becoming a headline written by people who dislike crackers. Mr. North has been cautioned. Miss Vale is no longer our conduit. We ask that you refrain from publishing anything that makes the word surveillance appear near our mark. Then you will refrain from surveillance, Wolfe said mildly. If you wish to see mouths, you will do so by standing in line with a tray and a ladle and no photographer. And if we don't, he asked, then your name will appear near mine in a sentence that makes your board itchy, Wolfe said. We can both be miserable. Brands smiled without teeth. I respect bluntness, he said. We will issue a statement. We will use your phrase program consent and pretend we invented it. You may also pretend you invented enough, Wolfe said. It will flatter you. He left looking like a man who had been forced to drink something healthy. I marked a W in the corner of the day and decided not to say it out loud. The brownstone doesn't like cheer, it prefers completion. We weren't done. At 4 o'clock, the little silver phone chimed one more time like a conscience asking to be used as a doorknob. B-End Control had sent a last gasp. Next steps unchanged. Vote or replace. That line had the smell of a script someone forgot to update. I showed Wolfe. He raised his eyebrows as at a joke that had gone out of style. Answer, he said. Say, replace happened. Vote impossible. Find a new story. I typed and hit send and watched the typing bubble blink and vanish without courage. Sometimes you don't get a farewell. The world just stops returning your calls. At 6, we ate like people who had earned dinner without deserving it. Wolfe was polite to the squab because it deserved an apology for the company it kept last night. We were finishing the beer when the doorbell rang, a quiet, modest ring that had never belonged to Saffron Vale. I went. It was her anyway. She had no sunglasses and no box. She had a face stripped to the wood. I came to tell him I'm not sorry, she said, and stepped past me because that is what stepping past doormen is for. In the office, she stood where the red leather had warmed to her once and addressed Wolfe as if he had won a prize she wanted. I did my job, she said. I put stories in places that needed them. Your contempt is a luxury. I don't have it. The foundation will now die slowly of righteousness without me. No, Wolfe said. It will live slowly with patience without you. She tilted her head. You think I did it for money. I did it because there is no other way to get rich men to care. You can call it prostitution if it helps you sleep. I call it vanity, Wolfe said, as if dictionary entries paid rent. And addiction to applause, a vice subtly more destructive than theft for people like you. She smiled once because habit, and the smile fell to the floor. Put that in your book, she said to me. I don't write books, I said. I write checks to butchers. She nodded, which on her meant surrender had learned a little grace. You'll win, she said to Wolfe. For a while. Then someone who tells better stories than I do will win. You won't be able to eat him. I eat nothing but food, he said, which is why I'm still alive. She left with her head up and her title gone. I listened to the door close and tried out the idea that we had done something permanent. It didn't stick. The world isn't a ledger. It's a kitchen with more hands than knives. Wolfe wiped the last trace of sauce from his plate with bread and consigned the day to the past as if he had jurisdiction over time. Tomorrow, he said, there will be more men who think listening is a right they can buy. There will be more hats, and we will remind them that a house is not a hallway. Do you want me to tell Lon the version where nobody looks silly? No, he said. Tell him the version where everyone does. It is the only one that ever sells. The phone rang. Saul. North sent a courier to Pharaoh with a resignation letter and a bill, he said. They paid the bill. He kept the pen. I'm going home. Thank you, I said. Send the pen a sympathy card. The evening did its trick where it looks like it has put itself away, and then the city breathes again. I checked the bolts. The chain sat right. The globe gleamed with the Atlantic where Wolfe likes it. Somewhere downtown, a blogger discovered a thesaurus and began to regret it. Upstairs, the orchids exhaled. Wolfe refilled his glass, took one last deliberate swallow, and set the empty down like a verdict reserved until morning. By morning, the brownstone had shed the last of the night's fingerprints. Fritz restored the kitchen the way a man restores a painting. Slow wrist, clean light, no speeches. The chain on the back door sat in its notch like it had never learned bad habits. The spice rack was back to Fritz's theology. Telecherry where God put it, Malabar minding its place. The globe showed the Atlantic where Wolfe likes to imagine civilization keeps its balance. If there was a scent of camphor left in the house, it wasn't from this century. Lon filed a piece that did what good pieces do, made villains yawn and honest people nod. Plans paused pending operational review and program consent, it said twice, which is how you make donors itch without breaking skin. He saved the adjectives for a rainy day and settled for verbs that any church would approve. The blogger who thinks he invented soup tried a metaphor about secret menus and got tired halfway through. Brindle and North put out an anodyne "We Value Mission Partners" note whose font apologized for existing, and Faro Foods discovered the word listening as if it owed them royalties. If there had been a parade, nobody marched. At 9:30, Reed called from a hallway that had borrowed dignity from acoustics. The board had met in a room with bad coffee and better light. The draft had passed. The veto lived in paragraph 3 where it could act without swagger. Appendix B had been removed from the liturgy and replaced with a sentence that understands itself. He sounded like a man who had opened a window and discovered there was still weather outside. Behind him, someone said something about minutes, and he said something about procedures that made me want to frame the word. Lyle telephoned at 10 and made it sound like he had personally invented restraint. The audit committee embraces a 2/3 threshold for discretionary reclassifications, he told me, dry as toast. Also, I appreciate, Mr. Goodwin, the phrase program consent. It is clarifying. Clarity makes you look taller, I said. Wear it with those cufflinks. He didn't laugh, but when he hung up, there was less starch in the click. At 11, Miss Caro arrived in person with her steward in tow. Not the hat man, the other one, the lawyer who had hired the hat man and found his chessboard kicked under a table. Latham carried a check like a confession. She gave it to me to give to Wolfe and told Latham to sit on the bench in the front hall and write himself a letter about diligence. He did, and I liked him better for it, which is not the same as liking him. In the office, Wolfe read Faro's statement, tipped one eyebrow at the point where embedding brand empathy tried to look like soup, and let it fall into the basket where paper goes when it needs to think about what it's done. He accepted the check with 2 fingers, not because the money mattered, but because accepting it witnessed the insult that had brought it. He told me to send a receipt with the line, "For services rendered," and the prevention of worse services. I checked in on Ortiz after lunch because a man who has held a day key without thinking should learn how to hold a job with more thought. He met me at the 70s doorway like a man auditioning to be gate, not doormat. He had shaved. He said he'd called Reed that morning to report a vendor liaison who had come sniffing for another prep window. He had said no without raising his voice, which is a skill. The liaison had tried "Miss Vale authorized it," which is a sentence that didn't do any heavy lifting anymore. Ortiz said the best words he could have found. "She doesn't work here." I told him that if a demo truck ever turned up for him to love, he should make sure the title wasn't a fairy tale. Then I let him get back to his keys like a man who'd stopped thinking of them as favors. Saul sent a note, not a call. North resigned by courier. Faro paid him. Vale pitched a hedge fund at noon. Pitch landed flat. She'll surface again with a new adjective. That's Saul. Wrong about people as rarely as a cat is wrong about gravity. I tried not to feel sorry for her and succeeded. She'll find another room to rearrange. The city is full of rooms that enjoy being rearranged. By 3, the brownstone had its ordinary afternoon temperament. Orchids absorbing devotion upstairs, Wolfe investing patience in a book whose index had offended him, Fritz laying out a cutting board with the attention we give altars when we're trying not to be superstitious. I sorted the morning's paper and found a small square in the classifieds that made me grin. A notice from Brindle and North that they were restructuring their integration division. If you've never watched 2 euphemisms fight to the death, you missed a show. I brought it in and set it by Wolfe's elbow. He didn't look. He can smell that sort of thing across a room. The doorbell did a regular American ding. No hat this time. A messenger with eyes like polished nickels handed over a flat box the size of a legal pad. Return address? None. He asked me to sign with a pen that had been chained to his clipboard. I used my own. He nodded once like a man saved and left. Inside the box, a hat. Not a twin to Tynan's. This one was a sober brown with a respectable ribbon. Under it, a card. For your office. I will not wear it in your house again. T. There was a faint, clean scent of camphor that had done its duty and was prepared to retire. I carried it in like evidence and set it on the corner of the desk where the light slants around 5. Wolfe looked at it, and you could have believed for one instant that he was amused. You would have been wrong, but it would have been a pleasant mistake. You will not put that in the umbrella stand, he said. I could hang it in the front room as a warning. It is a reminder, he said. Warnings are for boys who run. Reminders are for men who sit. We didn't have to talk about it more. The hat had written its own footnote. I took it to the hall, not the stand. High shelf, out of reach, where it could learn perspective. If the guest ever came back, he would see it and either take it with thanks or consider the shelf a sentence. Wolfe would approve either outcome. Around 4, the little silver phone from Vale's clutch buzzed one last time and did something like a bow. Account deactivated. BN/control had ended the performance. I shut the device off and placed it in the drawer where we keep souvenirs that don't look good on mantels. Dinner was guinea hen with a sauce that had traveled all afternoon from idea to law. Wolfe treated it with the attention he gives a good argument. He ate as if he were proving something important and quiet. There was beer, because there always is, and the glass left a ring on the coaster that looked like punctuation. After, he leaned back and confessed to the ceiling that humanity exhausted him. The ceiling, which has seen worse, took it like a man. At 8, I walked to the front door with the idle intention of checking the bolts I already knew were engaged. The city outside had put on its night face and was trying to talk itself into being clean. A man down the block argued with a taxi in rhyme. I didn't see any sedans doing impressions of virtue. The streetlight made a halo on the stoop that wouldn't have suited our hat. It might suit someone else's someday. I shut the door, set the chain, and gave the brass plate a polish with the edge of my sleeve. If you've lived here as long as I have, polishing that plate feels like a handshake with the building. The building shakes back. Wolfe's voice came from the office, not loud. Archie, he said. Present, I said, and went in. He had the annotated minutes on the blotter, their margins scolded into silence by the new policy. He didn't touch them. He said, there are crimes of appetite and crimes of anemia. I prefer appetite. It can be fed into decency or starved into death. Anemia merely borrows a conscience from the nearest available story and calls it a day. He let his eyes rest on the hat's absence. Last night we interrupted a lie scaled for comfort. That is all. Do not tell yourself we improved mankind. I'll settle for improving the pantry, I said, and Ortiz's odds. He conceded that with a tilt of his head. The pantry is not mankind. It is better. The phone rang. It was Reed again, not with bad news for once. He'd just come from the kitchen. The line had run smoother than it had in months. No photographers, he said. No banners. The freezer repairman's coming in the morning. I asked him if he wanted naming rights, and he said I could name him Phil if I signed the check. I said done. He laughed like he hadn't heard himself do it in a while, thanked Wolfe, and hung up to go have a sandwich he didn't have to sell to anyone first. We sat a while and let the day evaporate. Wolfe poured the last of the beer with the concentration he gives to endings. We will send Mr. Lyle our bill tomorrow, he said. We will not itemize hat. If you did, he'd ask whether it was deductible. Everything is deductible, he said, except folly. I asked him if he wanted a word with Saul before the night finished stretching its legs. He said no. Saul already knew the rest and would prefer to buy himself a decent pie with the time. We both approve of that kind of economy. When I took the glasses to the kitchen, Fritz was testing a custard with a spoon like a judge deciding whether a defendant had learned anything. He said, "It was my chain," in a tone that forgiving men use when they don't actually forgive. I told him the chain had learned its lesson, and he said the chain was not who he meant. I let that be. Morality goes better with dessert when you don't nag it. Back in the office, Wolfe had turned his chair a degree and was looking at the space where the hat hadn't been. "You will tell Mr. Cohen," he said, "that the phrase program consent is not to be domesticated. If anyone uses it to sell a sponsor, I will invite them here and deny them beer." I said Lon would settle for living, and he said that was sensible of him. He closed his eyes then, not to nap, to put away words. I waited for the closing line. He always has one when the house has been invaded and restored. When it came, it was the kind that registers at the bone rather than on paper. "People want their names on things they did not make," he said. "The only honest name on food is hunger. The next is the cook's. All others are labels for men who need applause to know they exist." He opened his eyes and looked at me without malice. "We are fortunate. We exist without applause." I said I applauded him sometimes, which is my way of keeping him in shape. He snorted, which is his way of admitting that my existence has its uses. Then he told me to turn off the light and to tell Fritz that the custard was allowed into the world. I did both. The office went dark. The orchids breathed. The city kept impersonating order, and the hat on the high shelf waited to be a reminder. If another guest ever arrived wearing one into this room, I'd know two things without being told. There would be camphor in the air, and we were about to earn our dinner. I'll say this much for Nero Wolfe. When he decides it's time to spring the trap, you don't need a wall clock or a calendar to guess when it'll happen. He'll sit back in that throne of his, drink beer like he's timing the planets, and let everyone else think the case is dragging on. But when he finally raises his head and tells me to arrange their presence, it's the kind of summons that means the fat lady has already sung, and she's packing her bags. That evening, the Brownstones' office looked like a stage waiting for the curtain. Wolfe was in his chair, massive and immovable as Gibraltar, with the globe lamp casting a warm pool of light on his desk. I had done the legwork he ordered, which meant every suspect who mattered had been corralled and was now either sitting uncomfortably on Wolfe's red leather chairs or leaning against the bookcases pretending not to sweat. Kramer was there too, cigar jammed between his teeth, grumbling about being dragged into another one of Wolfe's circuses, but not leaving either. He knows a front-row ticket to Wolfe's finale is worth any amount of growling. The players. We had the bereaved widow, as stiff as a poker and glaring daggers at the lawyer across from her. The lawyer himself, tapping a nervous rhythm on his briefcase. The secretary, who had insisted she had nothing to do with anything but couldn't stop wringing her hands. And of course, the charming rogue of a cousin, lounging in a way that tried too hard to look casual. Wolfe didn't address them immediately. He let the silence thicken until even I felt like clearing my throat. When he did speak, it was in that deep, lazy tone that could fill a courtroom without rising a notch. "You are here," he began, "because one among you committed murder. You know it, I know it, and very soon Inspector Kramer will know it in a way that leaves no ambiguity." Kramer gave a grunt that might have been impatience, but Wolfe continued smoothly as though the room belonged to him, and it did. "The matter hinged," Wolfe said, "on something deceptively small. Archie, tell them." That was my cue. I laid it out, nice and simple, like I'd been rehearsing it in my head ever since Wolfe whispered the pieces to me an hour earlier. The bottle of wine found near the body was supposed to look like an accident, but the glass it was poured into had a trace of lipstick. The victim didn't wear any. Somebody else did. The widow stiffened. The secretary turned pale, and the cousin smirked like I'd just accused him of jaywalking. Wolfe's gaze slid past them all and came to rest like a ton of bricks on the lawyer. "You, sir," Wolfe said, "assumed that detail would be overlooked. It wasn't. You shared that wine with him, not in camaraderie but in deceit. And when you realized the document he was preparing would ruin you, you acted. Poison, cunningly deployed, is still poison, and the lipstick trace betrayed you." The lawyer sputtered, tried to rise, then sank back as if Wolfe's words had pinned him in place. Kramer took the cigar from his mouth long enough to bark, "That true, Goodwin?" "Every word," I said. "We even had the lab check the glass. Same brand of lipstick the counselor's wife uses, and guess who borrowed it?" He did. The widow let out a strangled sound, part outrage and part vindication. The secretary covered her face. The cousin's smirk finally faded. Kramer stepped forward, handcuffs at the ready, and the lawyer broke like a cracked vase. "I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to. He was going to destroy everything." His words tumbled into incoherence as Kramer snapped the cuffs shut with professional relish. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and folded his hands over the arc of his vest. "Pfui, I've endured too much blather today. Remove him." Kramer grunted something that might have been thanks, though with him it could just as easily have been indigestion. He and the uniforms marched the lawyer out, still protesting in half-choked bursts. The widow stood, gave Wolfe a stiff nod, and swept out like a queen dismissed from court. The cousin slunk after her, and the secretary mumbled something about her resignation before vanishing too. The room emptied until it was just me, Wolfe, and the quiet tick of the wall clock. I poured myself a glass of milk. I don't go in for Wolfe's beer, and waited for him to deliver one of his post-game sermons. Instead, he opened his eyes just enough to regard me. "Archie, inform Fritz that dinner may proceed. I will require 2 quails and a soufflé." That was it. Case closed, lawyer bagged, justice served, and Wolfe back to thinking about his stomach. I couldn't help grinning as I picked up the phone to tell Fritz the coast was clear. It's a funny thing about working for Nero Wolfe. You sweat, you hustle, you run all over town, piecing together threads he can tug on from the safety of his armchair. And when it all comes together, when the guilty hang themselves on the rope Wolfe so neatly coils, it feels, well, it feels like maybe the world isn't quite as crooked as it looks. At least not while Wolfe is sitting there, immovable, making sure the truth comes out. And me? I'm just glad I get the best seat in the house every time the curtain rises. 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 Time the curtain rises.